for-hire transportation committee. As a brief, just as a brief catch-up from yesterday, very positive day yesterday, a good bit of testimony yesterday. We had folks from the new transportation referral companies that testified about their mode of operations. We had law enforcement, we had GMA, ACCG. We had a good bit of information that was throughout into this. As I'd said at the beginning of these hearings, this isn't just about a simple subject of a new business model. It's about how do we deal with other business models that's been in existence for years. I had given my own opinion about the background vetting that is what's actually started this whole discussion a year or so ago, and that's about the fact that it is and continues at this point to be my belief that people who are driving you and your families and your children, that there is a reason that the public has a reasonable right to expect that these folks are basically law-abiding folks who wouldn't be a threat to them, sex offenders and the type. It all comes down to process. The other issues brought up were the insurance part of the issues, which thank God will go in front of Chairman Richard Smith's Committee on Insurance and our distinguished colleague, Representative Carson, who's on that committee, to work out that, to hash out those issues. And then the revenue end of it. Who is abiding by current state law, paying their rightful due sales taxes and such. So that's what came through yesterday. It was, as I said, a good day. Today we're going to have, we have several folks, several groups and people on the agenda. We have the taxi and the limo operators. That's a part of the transportation delivery system. We have someone from the Georgia Sheriff's Association. Do I see a hand out there who that person will be? We have someone there from the law enforcement end. We have probably the more important person that's going to be dealing with one of the state agencies that licenses chauffeur permits at this point, and may be the depository of how we come up with all this other vetting and screening. And that's we have Director Mitchell from Department of Driver Services. We have Mr. Keys, who we accidentally had him down for yesterday, but he's here today. And then we get into the revenue. We have the Georgia Department of Revenue. That being said, yesterday we'd introduced a couple of the members on the committee. Today we have the full committee. And at this time, I'm going to let them start at this end. And if they would, just introduce yourself.
Emory Donahue, District 30, Hall County.
Dale Rutledge, District 109, Henry County.
John Carson, representing part of Cobb and Cherokee counties.
Lynn Riley, District 50, Johns Creek and North Fulton.
Thank you, members, for being here. At this time, while in the order of being on the agenda, the limo and then the taxi operators, as they make their presentation, I want to tell anyone here that would like to sign up to speak today, if you're not signed up, if you would come up here and see either Missy or Abby to be signed up to speak. That being said, Mr. Snyder, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm here today on behalf of the manufacturing industry. I've been received what we want to speak, and I will tell you who the speakers will be and how we arranged it this morning. Jeff Green from Green Limousine will speak first. Dennis Deloach from Cary Limousine will speak second as the president of the GALA. Mr. Rick Hewitt of Checker Cabs, Ron Fennell for the taxi industry, Kevin Ross, attorney who represents the taxi industry, and then I'd like to make some final comments after those people speak. So we'll try to do it as efficient as possible. We've all talked, and we try to work hard not to be repetitive and just hit upon the key issues that we think are important for the committee's consideration. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff.
I might ask, do y'all by chance, any of your folks have a PowerPoint or anything that they need to?
I think there's just, Mr. Hewitt has a PowerPoint that he has coordinated
Good.
with Abby to take care of.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for taking your valuable time to listen to our concerns and grave concerns. My name is Jeff Green. I'm the founder and president of Green Worldwide Transportation. I'm also one of the co-founders, past president of the Greater Atlanta Limousine Association, currently serving as vice president and on the board of directors for the National Limousine Association, as well as the past president for the National Limousine Association. I started Green Classic Limousines, recently changed their name to Green Worldwide Transportation, 26 years ago. When I first got into business, I made a conscious decision, and prior to that, I was an Atlanta police officer for almost 15 years. So I understand both the enforcement side of it as well as from the operating side. When I decided to get into the limousine business, I made a conscious decision to make inquiries and find out what I had to do to become a legal operator. It wasn't hard, but I complied with every letter of the law, including the sales tax. And I started my company, followed the letter of the law, and continued to operate. Years and years have come by, and here we now are in an era where technology seems to be taking hold and growing. Technology is great. We have technology. We even have our own apps. However, we are beginning to determine and find out that there are entities that are operating for hire that aren't following or playing by the same rules that we are. We have a lot of expenses involved, which includes vetting our drivers by the proper background checks, driving, classes, and training. And I think it's really incumbent upon this committee to determine, most importantly, what's the best route for public safety. And I will tell you that also as part of the National Limousine Association, we hear stories, we get inquiries from all across the country. We have close to 2,400 limousine operators that are members of the NLA. And we hear a lot of stories about the TNCs. For example, right here in Atlanta alone, an Uber driver not too long ago pulls a gun on a valet at JCT Kitchen because he asked him to move his car. In San Francisco, you had an Uber driver hit a passenger with a hammer because they questioned him about the route he took, increasing the fares, and then the fares were way more than they were quoted. You hear about the little girl also in California that was killed by the Uber driver. You further hear in Washington, D.C., how a young lady, the daughter of an affluent parent, was raped by an Uber driver, and just recently we heard about the same thing in India. The list kind of goes on, and just imagine what we're not hearing. What you don't hear is about the limousine drivers doing anything of the sort. The reason is because we go through all the extensive background checks. And I was a little taken back as I was in this hearing yesterday when I saw the PowerPoint that was presented by, for further discussion, we'll call them the TNCs because there are multiple of them, where on their background checks they use a third party. And in that third party they did a comparison to the FBI. But what this third party does not do was fingerprint checks, which is really the only proven way to get the real identity. And I can tell you from when I was an Atlanta police officer, the number of times I was given a false name, false social security, false information, and the only way it was really determined was once the fingerprint checks came back. Then we really know who we're dealing with. The same thing really applies to our industry and to anyone that's driving a vehicle for hire. Like I said earlier, I made a conscious decision to do things by the book. The majority and almost all the limousine companies in the state of Georgia are the same way. We pay sales tax. I've paid in the last 5 years almost close to $2 million in sales tax. And if you ask me how many runs I did, I can tell you. If you tell me or ask me how many chauffeurs I have and what they've done, I can tell you. There's nothing to hide. The only reason I would not be able to produce that is because I don't want to. And the reason I don't want to is because I'm afraid of what the repercussions might be. So being a legal operator is critical to us. And that's something that we're very, very concerned about. Sales tax, well, after hearing yesterday, it makes me want to kind of stop paying sales tax and just negotiate with the Department of Revenue, which is what they said. Well, we're in negotiations with the Department of Revenue. Well, that's not fair to us because we've been paying sales tax. We made that decision to operate when we came into Georgia to pay sales tax. Why don't they? Whether they like it or not, they are a vehicle for hire. The law says so. It's the existing laws on the book. And it clearly says on those existing laws, you're either a limousine company or you're a taxi company. You can't be both. And there are definitions of to what is a taxi. A meter, even though it may be a phone, it does measure distance, time, and calculates a rate. That's a meter, any way you cut it. And if you are a taxi, you come under the jurisdiction and regulations of the local municipalities. If you're a limousine company, we come under the state. And one of the things that our association and our members have done, and I think they've done a great job, is to, one, make sure that those who are traveling in our vehicles, whether it's the most important cargo, the children of parents, that they are safe, that they operate within the boundaries of the law. And not only safety, but I keep kind of harping on the sales tax because that's a big issue. It is a very big issue to us. And we are really, really concerned about that. Insurance is real simple in a sense that there's personal insurance and there's commercial insurance. I heard in I guess testimony yesterday that their insurance covers when passengers are in the car, and they made that point and emphasized passengers in the car. What about when the passengers aren't in the car? It's still a commercial vehicle. If I have a sedan or a limousine or a van or a minibus, doesn't matter what the vehicle is, but it is properly registered as a limousine company, and I am traveling on the roads, even though I may not have a passenger, and we hit somebody in a crosswalk or we have an accident, commercial insurance covers us because it is 100% commercial insurance, not just when we have passengers. That should be of a major concern. And what I heard yesterday was uncertainty, even from the insurance gentleman that represented the TNCs, of whether that coverage might extend, because all they continued to harp about was passenger in the vehicle. And that to us is a grave concern. We're not asking them to go away. We want them to play by the same level playing field that we are, because there is expense to being a legal operating limousine company or a taxi. And if you're not paying those expenses, which include sales tax, then you have an unfair disadvantage against us. And we didn't make the laws, but the laws are on the book. They've been here for a very long time. We're not asking to change it because that's what we operate under. And we don't think it's fair for an entity such as Uber, Lyft, Sidecar, any of the other TNCs to come in here and say, well, we operate in a gray area. We don't want to operate by the laws of Georgia. Well, there's a reason they're only legal in a handful of states. And when they put up their map, there was only a handful of states that were legal in. There are a lot of states, including Nevada, that have caused them and made them cease operations for a lot of reasons. One of the bigger reasons being public safety. There were grave concerns that the background checks were not properly done. And it's very obvious in the media because it has been exposed of all the shortcomings and all the issues and unsafety that comes with the Uber drivers. This is not the normal reaction or normal actions of a well-vetted, a background check showing no previous past physical threat to anyone. And that is what our grave concern is. What we are really asking is that they just play by the same rules we are. The laws are on the book. Either they declare they're a limousine company and they meet those regulations, or they declare they're a taxi company and they meet those regulations. We've been doing this for a long time, and we understand change happens, and we're all about change. Almost every operator and taxi company in this room, we have our own apps just as well. But with those apps, we've gone the extra steps of making sure that what we do is completely legal. The drivers in the limousine industry go through the fingerprinted background checks. You have the entity of the Department of Driver Services, which I know is speaking later, that does a fantastic job of making sure that we follow the proper procedures. Even if a driver checks the wrong box, they're denied until they get the paperwork right and they follow all the regulations. Then the companies themselves go to the extra steps. We have a 40-hour training. We make them come in with a 7-year MVR. We look at their driving record. We contact their previous employers. And the majority of the Uber drivers, they never even see the driver. They just submit paperwork, and who knows what's on it. And like I said earlier, a third-party background check without fingerprints doesn't really tell the story. All it does is cover up what could be a leading problem. And we were asking this committee to please take in consideration, and I understand that your priority is the public safety, and that is our priority as well. Thank you very much for your time. Also, one other thing, I do have a paper on the TNCs done by the National Limousine Association, which I will leave for each member of the committee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Next speaker will be Dennis DeLoach of Kerry Limousine, who's the president of the Georgia Greater Atlanta Limousine Association.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Again, I'm Dennis DeLoach, Executive Vice President, Kerry Limousine, Atlanta, Georgia. I serve as the president of the Greater Atlanta Limousine Association. Kerry is a stakeholder, a very interested stakeholder in the outcome of your committee results. Kerry has been in Atlanta operating according to laws on the books for over 50 years. We are a major limousine operator within the state. Our contention is competition is good and it's encouraged. Technology is good. It is here to stay. As Jeff alluded, we all have applications that we use every day. Our intent is not to put companies out of business, but to level the playing field and ensure, public safety. I concur with just about everything, 100% of what Jeff had to say, so I'll kind of summarize my notes here. But we do need to level the playing field. And I see there are 4 areas that really need to be addressed, and those include background checks, vehicle inspections, commercial insurance requirements, and the sales tax issues. I think the public safety should be first and foremost. I think it always has been. I think it always should be. So there should be proper vetting of drivers. I would encourage the fingerprinting method for ensuring the proper vetting of drivers. I was concerned yesterday when I heard comments from enforcement stating that they would approve or agree with a fly swatter approach, a third-party facilitator, if you will, to do background checks using social security numbers. Now you and I, we all know that social security numbers come a dime a dozen on the street. That's not proper vetting of chauffeurs. I would encourage fingerprint vetting, background checks. I would recommend all vehicle for hire drivers, chauffeurs, be required to obtain a chauffeur's permit. This is in place. The Department of Driver Services provide those. There's now an endorsement on our driver's license. Our chauffeurs show the license. The permit's on the back of that. Any enforcement officer can see that and verify the driver's has been properly vetted. I would encourage annual vehicle inspections to ensure that vehicles are operable, that they're roadworthy. Surely public safety, that's a public safety issue there in itself. Insurance. Today's laws require vehicle for hires to obtain commercial insurance. The state of Georgia requires a licensed insurance company to have a minimum of $300,000 coverage. Our association, the GALA, requires our membership to have $1.5 million. Kerry International. Kerry Atlanta is a franchise of Kerry International. Kerry standards require that we obtain $5 million coverage. We recognize the risk. We recognize the liabilities. We understand the coverage that's required. Surely these technology companies would be required to have minimum coverage, commercial coverage, Let me reiterate, commercial coverage, not personal auto coverage, but commercial. Another point that needs to be addressed is the sales tax issue. I've used the technology company services, and it was a good service. They didn't collect sales tax. My company, Carrier Limousine, Jeff's company, all the other operators, all the other stakeholders are at a major disadvantage. We have to pay sales taxes. It's not being done by the technology companies, referral companies. I would recommend that we eliminate the sales tax altogether. If you want to level the playing field, why should I collect and pay sales taxes? Level the playing field for me. Finally, enforcement. We have rules on the books. There has to be enforcement. Without enforcement, there's no bite. There are no teeth to the bite, if you will. I read about a year and a half ago, Travis Kalanick, who's the founder, he's the president of Uber. He was interviewed, and his comments were that they entered a marketplace and they looked at the laws and the ordinances that were in place. If they were enforced, they stayed and operated at will. If they weren't enforced, they moved on. That happens throughout the country, and that's wrong. There are laws on the books. Laws need to be enforced. We abide by them every day. I would expect new players coming into the market abide by the same rules and regulations. There needs to be enforcement. I would recommend possibly an intergovernmental agreement whereby local law enforcement and state law enforcement are allowed to enforce state and or local laws. I've heard Department of Public Safety say they don't have the manpower, they don't have the monies to enforce laws. But there may be a way around that with this intergovernmental agreement. Those are my comments. I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you so much.
Sorry you didn't move quick enough. You have a question.
He was walking over.
Welcome to the General Assembly hearing process. If you don't see a hand go up, move quick.
It's called getting out of the well, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate your time. So, in regard to the sales tax, because of the difficulty in determining the jurisdiction, whether it's origination or destination of the passenger and so forth, so are you saying you would recommend that the General Assembly do away with the sales tax or phase out the sales tax on these type of transportation services?
I would recommend that the sales tax is done away with completely, yes. In regards to our industry, the limousine industry, I think the state of Georgia is one of a few, maybe 10 or 11 states that require a service industry such as...
We're one of 7, and the closest one is West Virginia, yeah. I researched that information with the Tax Foundation last night.
To collect and pay sales taxes. So my recommendation would be level the playing field. Do not require our industry to collect and pass along sales tax. Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you a question. If you're not comfortable answering that, that's fine. I want to understand how much revenue the sales tax on transportation or on these services the state generates, and we have someone from DOR here, but it's difficult for DOR to track that because the NIAC codes on the sales and use tax returns on a quarterly basis are not always accurate. Okay, so somebody might be listing under taxis, they might be under listing limos, and those two are fine, but they might be listing under rental or lease of a vehicle, those type of companies. It might be listed under a totally different type of company, maybe a sole proprietorship or so forth. So can you give me a sense of, maybe it's a loaded question to ask you what your percentage of the market share you think you have in say, the state of Georgia, because I'm looking at just the city of Atlanta. I'm looking at the total state tax revenues. So you mentioned, I think, was it you mentioned you remitted, or was the other gentleman mentioned $2 million of? if you had a guess, how much would you believe, based on your market share and how much you remit in sales tax, how much would you expect the state of Georgia is receiving in sales and use tax revenues? And that number, I understand, would include state and local portions.
Representative Carson, if I could answer that, because I did a survey of the various limousine companies in the association to try to get at exactly the point that you were making, because we had the same frustration that the Revenue Department had about getting a precise figure. But what we were able to gather between their reporting and what we felt we reported, there's somewhere between $2 to $3 million that's actually getting sent to the department. That's probably the number that's being done. We feel strongly that we have companies that pay 100%. Our guess is that there are people that are underreport. There are other people that don't report at all. And
Okay, is that $2 to $3 million per year?
Yes.
I just heard one person say that there's $2 million.
He had $2 million since he's been in business.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, 5-year period.
I'm sorry. Okay. Go ahead, Glenn.
So therefore, that's what we're looking at. I think really what we're talking about is, as you well know, this is one of the few services in the state of Georgia that's actually subject to sales tax.
Right.
Legal services, dental services, all these type of services are not. So frankly, at the end of the day, right now, anybody who's paying it is at a 7 or 8% competitive disadvantage to people who are not. And that makes a big difference in terms of getting work and being able to keep that work. The suggestion that I have shared with the chairman, I have shared it with the Lyft and Uber people, is I've been at this long enough that I realize that even if we take something away, like the sales tax, there probably will be something put in its place. And it would be nice to have a system that's more verifiable than the frustration that both the Revenue Department and the industry currently has. And that could be done by use of a master license sticker type system, et cetera, that could replace that type of revenue that you're talking about. Is that responsive?
A sticker of some sort.
Yeah. In other words, if let's say, there can be two options. There could clearly be a sticker that you would pay a certain amount per vehicle that would go on the vehicle. So as an enforcement person, it's pretty easy to figure out if the appropriate tax has been paid.
Like a bingo stamp.
Like a bingo stamp. That's exactly right. Alternatively, you could have a master license system where you would pay, depending on the number of vehicles, you pay a certain master license, and then you pay a small amount of money, call it $20 or $25 per vehicle that would go on there. And again, this is very verifiable. The Revenue Department would have no problem telling this committee, we sold these many master licenses and these many stickers, or we've sold these many stickers, and you would have a clear number, and everybody would be treated the same.
But that would apply to TNCs. It wouldn't apply to taxis because they're already regulated by, and the taxes are collected by cities, right?
No. In other words, it would be a tax that would apply. This would supplant sales tax for taxis, limousines, for any for-hire.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And this would go in its place.
Okay.
That would be a much more verifiable system and a fairer system to what we're dealing with now.
And it would not be based on use. It would be just one time, once a year, you can give 100 rides or one ride.
Right. To give you a very small example, and I speak of this from personal experience, you all probably were involved at one point in all the legislation regarding the coin-operated amusement machines. Well, there used to be sales tax on that gross amount of money that was generated from the machines. It was pathetic, the amount of sales tax that the state actually received. The very first year that we went to a master license and sticker system, the state generated 3 times the amount of money. Today, they probably generate 15 or 20 times the amount of money, and it's very easy when the enforcement people go out. You look at the machine. If the sticker is there, you've paid it. If it isn't, then you violated the law. They put a seal around it, and it's seized. So this is a much more preferable system. I am sure Lyft, Uber, Mr. Deloach, and everybody else would prefer that you all say, no sales tax, let's just take it off. This is antiquated, 1 of 7, as you've indicated. I looked up the same thing last night, Representative Carson. But at the end of the day, I think I'm a little familiar with this process, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to just say, let's get rid of this and put nothing in its place. Remember, if we go to this sticker type system, then we are doing something else for public safety. The public can look at that and know that this is a legal car for hire, and this would be a good system. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
It is. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
The next speaker is Ron Fennell.
Thank you, Les. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your rigor in examining this issue. I've submitted for you a written version of my remarks, and be happy to answer some questions at the end. But I do, for the record, want to read the remarks to allow the public to know. My name is Ron Fennell. I'm currently, in my part-time job, I'm a Smyrna City Councilman where I chair the Public Safety Committee. So for a long time, and a member of the Transportation Committee while serving in the House, I'm very concerned about the public safety of our citizens. And I understand the many challenges that you face sitting in those chairs, having been there myself. You making difficult decisions amidst the criticism or in the face of maybe a popular trend, in this case with the new technology. I also know that your goal is to endeavor to make the right decisions to protect your fellow Georgians as you fulfill your constitutional oath and as a member of the Public Safety Committee. I've been asked to represent a group known as the Georgia Coalition for Transportation Compliance, which is an alliance of some of the groups and individuals that you have met in this process who are responsible taxi cab and limo owners and their members. The purpose of the organization and my charge here today is simple, and that is to ask the General Assembly to assure that all vehicles for hire are being properly vetted, both the drivers' cars and their owners, and that the general public be assured that vehicles in Georgia are safe, the drivers are properly screened, the cars properly inspected, and that the laws and ordinances of Georgia are equally enforced. For 20 years, I've proudly represented the hotel industry. We haven't always agreed with our friends in the vehicle for hire industry, as they'll acknowledge. We've always worked to perfect, improve, and go another step in the process. We've partnered, given a lot of our customer service training time to the training component that is required, particularly within the city of Atlanta. Our goal is to improve that customer service aspect. It hadn't always worked as well as we'd like, but we've had a great history of working together when we can, explaining to each other how important it is that our customers are well taken care of. The hospitality and tourism industry, as you may know, in the metro Atlanta region, for example, is the #1 private sector employer. It's important that the money we spend on luring visitors to Georgia and how we take care of that customer and the entire linkage is well served, and at the end of the day, when people leave, they go away with a good experience. If you have one bad customer service experience, whether it's the hotel clerk, whether it's the bellman, whether it's the wait staff at the restaurant, or the limo driver, or the car-driven taxi cab, that one bad experience is a poor reflection on the experience the individual visitor has. And so we've worked very diligently to make sure that all of us understand we're in the business together, and that the safety and the courtesy reflected on behalf of the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta in our most prominent case is well protected. No one is trying to keep anyone from operating a business in Georgia. I'll repeat that. No one is trying to keep anyone from operating a business in Georgia. Free market is very important to all of us who have started our own businesses, and I've started 5, and I know how important it is to obey the rules, pay our taxes, comply with all the appropriate rules and regulations that are a part of it. At the moment, there is a conundrum in law enforcement regarding compliance and jurisdiction. I'll add another layer after hearing what I heard yesterday. Due to the fact that there are no markings, as was indicated or otherwise distinguishing features like taxicabs or limos in the posting of marking of their vehicles. We have anyone who is accepting a ride for money needs to be clearly identifiable, both by the traveling public to know that they're properly vetted, but also by law enforcement who are charged with managing the process to assure compliance. Also, there's some misinformation and a great deal of distortion being offered about services that are being rendered, whether or not they are in compliance. Who knows whose word you take? Have a verification system. I think the one Mr. Schneider just outlined as a possibility of a way to make it very simple, clean, and easy. I know the tags on the vehicles, each one of us purchase our tag every year, whether we have a legislative plate or a prestige plate, or we just have a routine plate that we drive. That shows to the law enforcement community that car is legal to be on the road because it has been properly inspected. And in the metro region, where we have an attainment area compliance and additional emissions requirement, you can't get that tag unless you go through that process. You don't get the sticker on the tag to become legal to travel the roadways. It makes sense that the next step in that process, when we're actually entrusting these drivers to the visiting public or our families, that they have an additional visual cue that law enforcement can use as a guide as to whether or not they're going to have a conversation with that individual and that they are in compliance. Georgia law requires certain inspections and with the proper fees and taxes accordingly, and some training. That's an important element. I think Mr. Green pointed it out. I know Mr. Hewitt's going to point out the training requirements that either the companies themselves impose for the quality standard they expect, but also what jurisdictions have imposed. And these folks are just obeying the laws that are on the books. They're not inventing something, but those who are highly sensitive to the customer service aspect layer on an additional amount of training to make sure that their company's reputation and the repeat business that comes from that is well assured. I trust that the Georgia laws that are on the books, adopted by this General Assembly, your counterparts at the local level over time, they may not be correct, and every year you get a chance to revisit those laws and update them and meet expectations relative to new market conditions, new technology, and the like, and you're doing that. But when laws are on the books, regardless who you are as a business, when you come into the state to do business, you should obey those laws, not mock them, not ignore them, and not skirt them. If they're on the books and you're trying to do business in that space, you have to obey the laws. We have the construction industry. Many of you are familiar with that, how we've had a series of, over the years, upgrades to the opportunity to professionalize the expectation of your contractor. Same concept. If you're going to do business in a certain space, you need to know what the law is, you need to comply with the law, and you need to assure that, especially if you're the new kid in town, that you're obeying those laws, rather than mock them and say you can get away with not having to obey the law because you're new. In your role, particularly on this committee, the safety of the public is your primary focus. These new challenges with technologies and the changing marketplace require you to take a fresh look, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that through this study committee. You have the ability, with your actions, to assert state's preeminence on the roadways of Georgia to assure that the public is safe. Frankly, I can't understand why any new service provider would refuse to comply with the basic tenets of public safety. I can't understand why anybody would even assert or articulate or attempt to try to get away with not complying with the law. Rather than the millions being spent on marketing, lobbying, and legal services, why wouldn't any new company simply comply and compete? If their model is better, why should they tell the state of Georgia that we're only better, but we're above the law? I don't understand how anyone with a straight face come forward and try to assert that. If you, at the end of the day, hearing all the changes in the marketplace with the new technology, with the challenges the revenue has and public safety has, frankly, public safety is the biggest challenge in this process with the law enforcement officials, and I respect those folks who 24/7, 365 spend their time trying to protect our families, our businesses, and our homes. Why they are put in an unusual situation and they're understaffed at trying to enforce something that the General Assembly has passed. It's always been a challenge. We need to continue to support and fund to the fullest level possible our public safety officials in the field who are having to deal with this challenge, among others. If you make it a level playing field, then let the free market decide. And I don't think any of the competitive businesses who try to whip each other every day at winning one more customer than the other would argue that they're trying to keep another competitor out. They're fine with competition. They're big boys. They know what they're doing, and they fight every day for their piece of business. But let them fight on a level playing field. Give them a chance to do that, and I think you'll see that by protecting the public safety, by engaging in a methodology by which we can actually capture the proper revenue and focus it to the law enforcement community as is appropriate, that at the end of the day, the market will decide who's the winner in the competitive battle. And so we appreciate your consideration, allowing the free market to decide the competition, but doing so so that all are treated equally. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Very good. Any questions from the committee?
I'm leading the way.
No? Well, that's the advantage of having been a former member, Ron, that you know when to get up and get out.
Okay, next speaker will be Rick Hewitt, at Checker Cab.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. You've heard from me once on the first day here, and so I'm not going to bore you with a lot of redundant information about Checker Cab or why we have a problem with these new people that have come to town. What I am going to do is show you a presentation that I think pretty much says it all. So, yeah.
Give me 1 second to get it. Reach around you then, so. It's on the phone computer.
I didn't know it had such a thing on there.
You're supposed to be.
That's a mistake.
Okay.
Sound?
Mm-hmm. Brent should be on his way down here. 'Cause that's going to blast us out if it starts working. Okay. See if I can.
How can I help you? Hi, I just wanted to report that I was in an Uber earlier with a man, and he physically tried to touch me, and I was in the car, and he tried putting his hands on my shirt. He went off the grid, and what kind of driver was he? An Uber driver? The rideshare company?
Was just kidnapped by an Uber driver in D.C., held against my will, involved in a high-speed chase across state lines with police. Crazy.
Uber, you need to be responsible. The driver driving my teenagers.
Hi, I just wanted to report that I was in an Uber earlier with a man, and he physically tried to touch me, and I was in the car, and he tried putting his hands on my shirt. He went off the grid, and what kind of driver was he? An Uber driver? The rideshare company?
Was just kidnapped by an Uber driver in D.C., held against my will, and involved in a high-speed chase across state lines with police. Crazy.
Uber, you need to be responsible. The driver driving my teenagers was intoxicated.
The driver attempted to drive the wrong way down a one-way street and was also clearly stoned. No missing the smell.
Just because you need a ride doesn't mean you have to be abused or taken advantage of.
People who are riding in these cars should know that they are vulnerable.
I can't see people being allowed to offer commercial trips without having a truly police-vetted background check.
We support innovation in transportation, but we do feel that in order for innovation to be supported, there needs to be clear rules about who's providing the insurance and when.
Ultimately, this is an issue of making sure that passengers are safe.
The whole country, the passengers included and the drivers, are being kept in the dark about what really is going on with Uber and how it's really going to affect them.
Uber is not a tech company. Uber is a transportation company with a fancy tech app.
What they've said is that this is a new industry, therefore they get to be treated special. Well, this is nothing more than a new method of dispatch.
This thing looks like a taxi cab, operates like a taxi cab, charges like a taxi cab, in perhaps less elegant terms, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, is a duck. And it falls under our rules and regulations for commercial ground transportation carriers.
Under the law, if you accept money to transport somebody, you have a greater duty than a regular driver on the street. Uber says we don't transport anybody. We don't owe a duty, and certainly not the highest duty of care.
They went behind the committee's back, behind the backs of the people in this meeting, and went to other people in local government and state government and asked them to put pressure on us to not amend our code to include the definitions that would define them as a transportation company.
This whole business is just a tragedy waiting to happen, but they want to be exempt because they're special. They're technology, so they shouldn't have to follow the rules.
The debate has been who is liable insurance-wise for the accident, the driver or Uber.
Uber says we have nothing to do with them. We're just an app. We do not hire these drivers. They're independent contractors. We do not control them. So basically what people don't know is that if you get hurt by one of these cars, Uber's going to go, not me. It's got nothing to do with me.
Your private automobile insurance coverage will say, look, this is a commercial trip. We're not covering it. Lyft, Uber will say, look, the app was not on. We're not covering it.
Standard private passenger auto policy specifically excludes coverage for any kind of injury or damage that arises out of an accident while a driver's holding themselves out for hire. Either drivers aren't aware of that because they haven't read their policy, or they're aware of that and they're just hoping for the best.
Pizza delivery drivers, they have insurance on the pizza car. From the minute it gets turned on to the minute it gets turned off. Everybody else who's driving vehicles on the road, whether they're full or empty, carries commercial insurance 24/7. What they have done is externalized all the cost of their operation. So what they do is they just rake cash. If this were Exxon, people would be up in arms. But it's a cute little phone app, so people are not looking at it in the same way as corporate responsibility.
If you were to ask the average personal auto policyholder if they thought that they should pay a little bit more on their auto insurance to subsidize the activities of a rideshare driver or these companies, most of them would say no. And that's why it's important that people that are going to engage in this activity in these companies have insurance that specifically applies to these activities for the entire time that they're making themselves available for them.
You will have injuries, you will have claims on personal policies, you will have denials on those policies. Uber has a pittance of a policy out there in period 1 that says it'll cover $50,000. So who's going to pay? You and me. And I hope to God it's not you and me paying by the loss of a child.
There was a young girl that was killed in an automotive accident concerning an UberX driver. Uber is made a ruling for itself that it's not liable. We should not allow a private corporation to make a legal judgment.
UberX, Lyft are definitely not ride-sharing companies.
The lack of understanding in the legislature made it a prime opportunity for Uber and Lyft to engage in a massive disinformation campaign on a scale that I've never seen before.
They came in with their standard lingo, which was your code is outdated, it's ineffective, it makes no sense. They did not present us with any information concerning their company. They had not read our code. They were not familiar with the laws of the state of Alabama. And we actually took great offense because we just wrote our code completely, rewrote it from scratch in 2011.
UberX and Lyft attempt to be called ride-sharing companies, but it's simply smoke and mirrors to help sell their way into communities by saying there's something different than a taxi cab or a sedan or a limousine so that they can avoid any of the regulations.
Recognizing the extreme risk associated with non-professional drivers driving around on the street looking for rides, Uber set up a shell company. So it basically has put in a layer of protection to secure its $1.7 billion in assets from people who get hurt by UberX.
The only difference between them and a regular taxi cab service is the fact that they use unvetted drivers. They're not police checked. They're using personal automobiles. They're using insurance, which may be 1/5 the cost of commercial liability insurance. And they're operating without really any supervision at all, because the only thing that controls them is flipping on and off and out. There's no local management in most cases.
They think that we're trying to regulate them under the taxi format, under the taxi world. That's not necessarily true. However, we can't have a regulatory vacuum either, where Uber doesn't have any sort of regulations over itself and we don't ensure at least a minimum code of corporate compliance.
Regulation in the taxi industry especially is very, very important. It's an industry which is a necessity public service. Regulation is necessary so that whether you're rich or poor, whether you live in a dense neighborhood or a very sparse neighborhood, you can have access in a reasonable amount of time to this on-demand service at a guaranteed rate.
When Uber came to the city of Birmingham, they actually pretty much told us they wanted no part of the transportation code. They felt that their drivers are small business. They should be allowed to operate however they want with no regulatory oversight, government oversight whatsoever. That also includes no business license and no paying tax on their income revenue. And we found that to be quite disturbing. Anything that required them to be in compliance with any law in general, they were totally against.
In the past, whenever we have open entry deregulated, service has not improved, service deteriorated, fares went up, and literally we were back regulating within a period of years. I've never seen anything like UberX and Lyft coming into the marketplace and completely ignoring all the rules.
We want Uber drivers and Lyft drivers to get good background checks. We want them to have minimum insurance requirements. We want them to make sure that they go through the process of making sure their cars are safe. We want government to keep an eye on the individuals and make sure that people are safe when they get into the back of a car, Because it's not just me, it's not just you, it's someone's son or someone's daughter.
The mentality of Uber is whatever we do, whoever we hurt, whatever we say, is all legitimized by us becoming profitable, taking over the transportation industry, and our own greed.
Okay, well, that presentation is by a group known as Who's Driving Who, which is a component of the Taxi Cab Limousine and Paratransit Association, a 95-year-old ground transportation company that consists of internationally cab owners, cab managers, limousine owners and managers, and paratransit company owners and managers. They have over 1,000 members and are a 95-year-old organization. Checker Cab has been a member of that organization for over 50 years, and I served as its president in 08 and 09. So they're obviously very concerned about what's happening here for obvious reasons, and that's a presentation that they actually prepared. I guess, again, I told you I wasn't going to bore you with the same stuff, so I'm going to give you a little analogy here. You know, Georgia is big in poultry, one of the largest poultry states as far as producing poultry and transporting poultry. In the state of Georgia, if you're going to transport chickens, you have to have a license, you have to have the proper license, you have to have the proper insurance. The drivers are vetted for a commercial driver's license. They have to be trained. And they have to have all the components as taxi cabs and limousines have to have for the most part. Now, surely the citizens and the visitors of the state of Georgia at least should be provided as much as chickens. And that's kind of a silly analogy, but I think it hit home with a lot of people I've told it to. So unless you have any questions, that's my presentation.
Any questions of the committee members? No?
No. Okay.
We thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good presentation.
Ross, who is an attorney who has done a lot of work with the taxi cab industry in Georgia.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Kevin Ross, and I represent the Atlanta Taxi Cab Company Owners Association. I've worked with them for more than a decade. It is an association of taxi cab companies that comprise more than 50% of the taxi cab industry in the city of Atlanta. We've been working with the city for the last several years on a comprehensive rewrite of the city ordinance, and that process is still ongoing. I thought this morning what I would share with the committee is some information that I think would be relevant to your legislative review here, and that is to kind of give you a brief survey of the vast amount and different types of litigation that's taking place across the country involving the so-called rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft. There is a very good document, which I think you would probably want to have your staff review, called A Primer of Litigation Involving these companies. It's written by a firm called Wendell, Marks, Lane, and Middendorf. And they go through about a dozen different types of litigation that are taking place around the country involving these companies. I'm not going to try to touch on all dozen, but I want to touch on some of the major ones. One of the things which you just saw in that presentation that Rick Hewitt showed you are personal injury lawsuits, and that is fairly predictable that in a vehicle for hire context there are going to be accidents, there's going to be injuries, and those private citizens who are injured are going to be bringing personal injury lawsuits, and that's triggering a whole range of questions about insurance coverage and whether or not these companies have adequate or proper insurance for their commercial activities. Another category of lawsuits that are taking place around the country are labor law violations and whether or not workers are being misclassified as independent contractors versus employees, and whether or not they're being compensated appropriately for their services. A very, very big category of litigation is taking place in about a half a dozen major cities around the country, including Houston, Chicago, Boston, are lawsuits involving false advertising, unfair trade practices, and consumer protection. There is a federal law known as the Lanham Act, which protects both against false advertising and unfair competition. These lawsuits that I've mentioned are bringing claims under the Lanham Act. There are also claims being brought by under state consumer protection laws by consumers who feel that they're being deceived relative to the services provided by these companies. You're also starting to see lawsuits about disability discrimination and allegations that these companies are refusing to provide service to the disabled community. You're seeing local and state governments bring actions for injunctive relief, cease and desist. I heard one of the speakers earlier allude to, I think it was Las Vegas, is one of those communities that is seeking on its own. And you're starting to see lawsuits actually against governments that aren't enforcing their laws for equal protection violations. And then finally, you're starting to see class action lawsuits. There's one here in Georgia being brought by drivers alleging unfair competition claims as well. That's a quick summary, but in reading these lawsuits and reading this litigation primer, you really get a lot of detailed information about what the issues are pertaining to the so-called rideshare companies and the threats they pose to public safety, the unfair competition that they are providing to existing industries like the taxi and limousine service, issues about the insurance and whether or not the public is being protected in that respect, and the notion that these vehicle for hire industries are basically public conveyances and meant to serve the entire public, not just some small slice of it. So that would be what I would share with you this morning, and I'll be glad. I did not bring the primer with me this morning, but I'll be glad to forward it to the committee staff for its review and for your consideration.
Do we have any questions?
Let me ask.
Which number, Mr. Dunn? Which number are you, Mr.?
Labor law violations. Is this pretty much unions that y'all belong to unions, or is this?
No, these aren't union issues. These are issues of whether or not drivers are being appropriately classified as independent contractors or as employees. Because if they're classified as employees, then there's certain wage and hour and other federal labor law protections that comes into play. So they're not union related. It's more related to that classification.
And discrimination suits, we see that everywhere. Attorneys are the only one ever wins. They make money from either side. What percentage would you say on the discrimination suits that you've seen come up in the last year or two?
Well, the one category I mentioned was disability. There are some lawsuits out there claiming that these companies are refusing to serve the disabled community. And so it's not the predominant amount of this litigation. These aren't other types of discrimination cases. And many of these cases are fairly early. I mean, this is a burgeoning problem and one where we're seeing an increasing number of suits, and I expect that you will see over time more and more lawsuits filed in these various categories. So that's one very specialized area pertaining to Americans with disabilities.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? No? We thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there was one other speaker we wanted to add. He said he would be brief, but Darrell Anderson is a member of the Georgia Limousine Association, and he asked just to make a few brief comments.
Good morning, committee chairman. My name is Darrell Anderson. Next year will be 34 years in the ground transportation business here in the state of Georgia, in the metro Atlanta area. I'm also a contractor at the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport that oversees all ground transportation, and including what is known as ride share. There's been a category that has been known as share ride ever since I've been in existing. Company comes and turn the name around, and now all of a sudden it's a share ride. We have, and you have, a lot more information than you guys had a year ago. I think from a public safety standpoint, we got some real issues that's got to be addressed. As the Vice President of the Georgia Limousine Association, a board member of the Minority Limousine Association, the main thing that associations try to do is make sure that we're not over-regulated, but we are regulated where we have a level playing field for everybody that's providing the service. Just because you reverse a name and now that it's called a ride share instead of a share ride. Share ride is a service that I provided for over 4.5 years that serviced the downtown, midtown, Buckhead from the airport. It's a van service. You pick up multiple people. You service multiple hotels or multiple destinations. That's nothing new. At the end of the day, whatever Uber, Lyft want to call themselves, they're providing ground transportation in the state of Georgia. And I hope, like our friends in Alabama, that they don't come to Georgia and insult us after years of working to make sure we have a solid ground transportation services throughout the state of Georgia, that we create a unlevel playing field and allow others to come in with a smoke screen, with so-called trade secrets, with different insurance categories. At the end of the day, they do the same thing that we do. They provide ground transportation. They use a app. Some of us use apps. We use technology. We use computer. We're providing a ground transportation services for the traveling public that may need it. That's what they're doing. They're not a technology company because they're not selling apps. When you hire Lyft or Uber, you're getting, and they're providing ground transportation. I sit on a task force at the airport, and one of the biggest challenges that we have, and the airport and the city's official waiting on the states because they say, hey, this is a state issue. Well, we get people come out to Ground Transportation Center asking for a Uber driver, well, a Uber car. Uber is not permitted. So they're misleading the public that they can provide services that's not even permitted at Hartsfield-Jackson. On a day-to-day basis, we come out and we add. The airport has an issue because companies, technology companies, don't identify themselves. So when they pull up the curbside like the regular limousines, the airport doesn't want to have to stop every passenger vehicle. But they may have to. They shouldn't have to be a interruption to the traveling public and people that are legitimate using their personal cars. But we got a serious problem. But there's laws already on the book that distinguishingly determine whether you're a taxi company or you're a limousine company. If we do nothing else today or next year, there's laws that right now say you either or. And to create another category for someone or some company that is providing ground transportation, connecting the public, the traveling public with the vehicle, is ludicrous at this point. We do it. Many of my colleagues have been doing it for years. If you want to know about my insurance, I'll give you anything you want to know about my insurance. Ain't no trade secret. I want everybody to know that they're getting in a vehicle, it's safe, and it's covered in every driver. The last point I wanted to make, I had a driver that did not pass the state background check that we're required to. A week and a half later, he's driving for Uber. Something is fundamentally wrong when those type of situations happen. Thanks for your time. Any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Any questions? Thank you so much. Good to see you, Darrell.
Members of the committee, I just want to make some final comments and summary of all that has you've heard from this industry. Obviously, I worked on this issue last year a great deal and continue to work at it. I want to preface my comments by making it very clear that I think I worked very hard both with Mr. Massey and Mr. Bowers and Mr. Reagan Marsh to try to craft something that everybody could live with. And I don't doubt for a moment their good faith in working with me. At the same time, I have to tell you, sometimes some people make sports analogies. I make movie analogies because I go to the movies to flush out the day-to-day workings of a legal practice and lobbying and things like that. And I'm sure there's no one in the world that's breathing that didn't see The Godfather at one point in their lives. And we all remember that part where Michael confronts his sister's husband after he figures out who killed Sonny, and he says to him, "Don't insult my intelligence. Just tell me if you did it. Don't insult my intelligence." And that became a line that in moviedom has gone again and again. I really try to be a good listener, and as an attorney, I try to use my legal skills to represent my clients, obviously never to lie to any representative or senator, but to try to set forth the policy solutions that strike the proper balance between what my clients want, what you all probably need to do as a state, and probably what my clients' adversaries need to have done. And I work very hard to try to get there. And here I sit, and I've listened to yesterday's presentation by Uber and Lyft, and I heard a lot of evasive comments. And it disheartens me because I feel I worked very hard, and the lobbyists for them worked very hard to try to reach a solution that we could present to you. Because I understand that as legislators, you would like to have somebody come forward and say, we've gotten together, we've talked this through, and we think this is a good public policy to put in its place. But I'm starting to get a little cynical about where we are with this issue. I have a friend in Legislative Counsel's office who's been here longer than I have, and who cynically tells me once in a while that everybody wants a level playing field as long as they have a distinct advantage. And I don't want this issue to come to that. But Uber and Lyft insults my intelligence, and I hope it insults yours, that they say that they don't know how many drivers they have in Georgia. They don't know really whether we're paying sales tax or not, whether we're paying income tax or not. This is just not believable. I mean, McDonald's knows how many hamburgers they sell every day. Are we saying that this company really doesn't know the volume of the business? What is all this secrecy really about? If it's not to obfuscate and to push back and to create a certain level of gridlock so that this issue goes nowhere. I thought the Uber drivers who testified yesterday were very sincere, and I think you were all very gracious not to ask them if they paid sales tax, because I think we all knew what the answer was going to be. But to let that happen, and the people that I represent are continuously at a 7 or 8% price disadvantage, goes beyond any sense of fairness that I can imagine. I mean, I've worked in the Capitol a lot of years. My hair went from brown to gray, all right? But at the end of the day, I always believe that this is not a process for the faint of heart. But I also believe that the system shouldn't be gamed so that the truth gets stifled and silenced, and that certain state agencies, which at times can be very heroic and at other times very embarrassing, play into, oh, this is going to be a lot of work, and let me find a way to push this work out. Now, I have talked to people at Driver Services, and this state ought to be proud of the people who work there, because they have 2 people who processed 2,649 chauffeurs' endorsements last year. And the bottom line is that's excellent. That would be excellent in the private sector. if we can embolden that department to make everybody get a chauffeur's endorsement if you're going to drive people for hire, then you've set one standard for everybody. And I don't think that's asking a lot. I listened to the GBI and I listened to the police chiefs. We all know that if we really care about public safety, I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. Either did any of you. You know what it takes to get a good background check. It takes fingerprints, it takes GCIC check, and NCIC check, and whatever else they're doing. Not any shortcuts. I mean, if I had a daughter, and I wasn't able to squeeze out a daughter, I just had 3 boys. But at the end of the day, if they were going into a car for hire, at the very least, if you can fingerprint people who serve alcohol, if you fingerprint people who buy a gun, is it a lot to ask to fingerprint people who are going to drive around you, members of your family? And with all the technology we have, and at least on conversations I've had with people from driver services, they say that with the cooperation of all companies, they can turn this around in a week. Now, I don't think it's a lot to ask for somebody to get something to them. If they can turn it around in a week, and we can have every driver, taxi, limo, rideshare, share ride, Nellie's car service, whatever you want to call it, every one of them gets the chauffeur's endorsement. Then you should all, and we should all sleep at night knowing we've done what we can do on that piece of the puzzle. What I resent is this substituting a quickie, sleight-of-the-hand analysis that's only marginally effective, but addresses the fact that maybe Uber and Lyft and Sidecar or whatever, they can put people to work in a day or 2 days where everybody else has to wait weeks. It's not right. I mean, it's just not right. Our esteemed head of public safety wants to make sure his daughter is safe in a for-hire car. But he's willing to shortcut, or as he says, fly swap the process? This is sad, and it's shameful, because it only feeds a perverse sense and an approach that will create a bigger staff question than catching the problem in the beginning. I don't want to focus on audits. I want to focus on enforcement. There should be officers out there jumping on the people who will not register, who will not get the proper licensure, and will not pay the proper tax. Enforcement, auditing is just a way to build a bureaucratic staff and not be effective. What driver services is talking about doing is a positive step. I listened to the city of Atlanta and what they require of taxis. I listened to what limos have to do according to state law. I'm having a hard time imagining why limos cars get inspected once a year, taxis are getting inspected twice a year, and the ride shares are getting inspected not at all. Makes no sense. What are we doing? I mean, every day I try to read the Atlanta paper, the Times, the Wall Street Journal, to get a sense of what's going on in the world, all right? Yesterday, there was 2 articles about Uber. One was France to ban Uber low-cost units, basically their UberX. I don't appreciate all the bashing that Uber has gotten in certain jurisdictions. I understand sometimes it's a turf war. But there is nothing that I have ever articulated or my clients have ever articulated that has ever said, do not let these people operate in the state of Georgia. That's not what this is about. But what this is about is making sure that what Chairman Powell said last year in his meetings, that this is about public safety. So public safety dictates we do a certain amount for everybody. Not level the playing field so somebody has a clear advantage, but level the playing field so that we're safe and fair in terms of a business model. we need to be diligent if we're to find the correct solutions. But solutions don't occur simply because someone gives lip service to cooperating, to being part of the dialogue, or to being kept in the loop. That doesn't get it done. I've been down here too many years to realize those are the watchwords for let's not get anything done. Let's not pass anything. Just keep me in touch. All right? It takes hard thinking and the mental toughness to say, let's cut the crap, put down the smoke and mirrors, and let's set a standard that although it may not be perfect, at least it responds to to correct inequities in the present state of affairs that we find ourselves in. If I came before you and I was representing McDonald's, and I would not have the lack of honor to tell you, I don't know how many employees they have. I don't know how many hamburgers they sell. I don't know what they pay their people. I don't know what taxes they pay. I wouldn't insult your intelligence by that. Chairman Powell is right. People in the South are gracious, but they're not stupid. There is a limit to hospitality. I mean, urinate on my leg and then tell me it's not raining, all right? I mean, this has just gotten to be more than rational people should accept. I want to get down to the specifics because I think that's what we're here today to do. If there was a plan, this is what the plan ought to be part of, and I hope it's part of your report. Every for-hire driver gets the chauffeur's endorsement, whether they're controlled by a city, controlled by the state. All for-hire drivers get the chauffeur's endorsement. That's the gold standard that we live by. Secondly, black or white, Jew or Gentile, taxi, limo, Uber, Lyft, rideshare, share ride, or whatever, we all need to do the same thing. And not as a lobbyist, but as a citizen, I ask you not to skimp on this. Fingerprints are the answer. You can't fake fingerprints. You can lie about a Social Security number. You can lie about a lot of other things. Fingerprints tell the whole story. GCIC, NCIC, if God can create the world in 7 days, we should be able to get a turnaround and know whether somebody should get a chauffeur's endorsement within a 7-day period. And I have faith in driver services that they can get us there. So that's item one. Item number two, you need to make a decision on inspection of vehicles. Either you're going to allow every company to basically attest to the fact that their car is safe, or you're going to have some sort of inspection process that everybody's going to adhere to. Not two times a year for some, one for the other, and none for the other. And I think the people I represent will live with whatever you decide, but they just want it's the same for everybody. Again, public safety doing audits is not the answer. Getting out in the street and following up on leads of people who are unregistered, either companies or drivers, that's the important work that needs to be done. Enabling the Revenue Department to have a system that's not hampered by old computers and being able to create a decal type system like Representative Carson and I talked about a little earlier, that's the type of solution that's easily verifiable. It also sends the word, as a previous speaker indicated, that there is a way to identify somebody as a for-hire car. The limos have license plates that say limo. The taxis have license plates that say taxis. I don't care if you take away those two and just say for hire for everybody. So the world knows that this car is a safe car that can be entered into. This tax issue makes my blood boil. Representative Carson checked the states that had the sales tax. I did the same thing last night. I also did some more legal research, and I found out there's a case called Collins versus Adam Cab Inc. in Georgia. 261 Georgia 305, 1991. This case is, and I would ask you all to read it. This case is on all fours with exactly what Lyft and Uber are doing. There is no question that under Georgia law and this case, they owe sales tax. And for them to have not paid for the last 2 years disheartens the people I represent, and it makes it that if you're big enough, just don't pay. But if you're a small guy, you'll get audited, and they can break the business. Doesn't make sense. That same type of logic needs to be looked at, that if you're going to have rideshare either in the same category or a separate category, they need to have a state ID number. They need to be paying income tax. If I sat here today and said, I'm going to contract with all of you, and the deal is I'm going to send you work, and you're going to get 80%, but you send me a check for 20%. That money that I'm generating is money that's being generated in the state of Georgia. You owe income tax on that. There's no question. And yet we get lost in these vagaries of the legal process to say, oh, well, I guess they're technology. Now, I don't give a crap about technology. You all have those little things in front of you. Everybody's spending their time. Their thumbs are moving. We barely listen to each other anymore. All right? But at the end of the day, you can have all the technology you want, but that's not an excuse not to pay tax. Now, if you all want to eliminate income tax, I'm sure the people I represent will be first in line to say you are the greatest reps that have ever come down the road. All right? But that's not going to happen. I know this process. But we can make it fair. License referral services, define terms, whether it's meters, metering device, taxis, limos, this all needs to be done. The taxi industry and the limo industry are not relics of the past. Technology is fine, but it's not a license to play cute. My friends at Uber and Lyft should be in Georgia, but not to play hide and seek with the rules governing for hire transportation. I would suggest to you that in addition to those items, we need to talk about the following issue. If I took you for a ride and I made you sign the following, that Les Schneider will not participate in disputes between you and a third-party provider. By using my service, you acknowledge that you may be exposed to situations involving third-party providers that are potentially unsafe, offensive, harmful to minors, or otherwise objectionable, and that the use of third-party providers arranged or scheduled using Les Schneider's service is at your own risk and judgment. Les Schneider shall not have any liability arising from, in any way related to, your transportation or relationship with third-party provisions. Now, we have a law in Georgia that says if, Representative Donahue, if I move your household goods from house A to house B, I can't make you sign this kind of liability. So we're giving protection to furniture more than we're giving to people, because these kind of disclaimers or limitations of liability are presently going on in this state. Now, maybe my clients want that, but I find it objectionable, and I don't think they do. I don't know of any one of them that require that to be done, that you sign away your rights. Please, there's an element of common sense here and decency that we need to move forward on. We need to protect consumers against undisclosed surge pricing. As long as I know what I'm being charged, that's okay. But it shouldn't be a surprise as it has occurred in other states. We should require credit card option for any kind of for-hire transportation. Zero tolerance as to drugs or alcohol. truth in pricing. It would be a living hell to put rideshare people under the local government, under each local government in the state of Georgia, to regulate them as they see fit. I know it. You know it. All right? I'm not advocating that today. But if you're not going to play fair, then perhaps you need to be brought into line with what solutions we have before us. I know in this process we have profiles in courage and profiles in cowardice. I've seen bureaucrats create audits of busy work that doesn't get anywhere, and I've seen bureaucrats and legislators who've really looked at the guts of enforcement and done the right thing. That's the choice that we have before us today. Please send the message that cuteness and smooth obfuscation does not win the day today. That the substance of people like Stacey Freeman and Bobby Potter, who talk to you about insurance because they understand the process, they need to be listened to and attention should be paid. This is too dangerous not to have coverage. Let's have all the competition that we can, but it should be modulated by the need for public safety, a true level playing field, and not playing in the shadows. There was another movie where the guy said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, I'm not mad as hell. I don't get mad as much anymore as I used to. But I'm not going to be jerked around, and neither should this committee or this House or this Senate or this governor. Let's support hard-working agencies who are offering solutions and not laziness, and who want to do the kind of job that's necessary for this issue. Now, last session, I was very hurt by the social media attack that was directed at Representative Powell. It was character assassination of the highest order, and there was a method to the madness, and I don't accept the fact that this was just a spontaneous response to a piece of legislation. We've all been around here long enough to know that this was orchestrated, and as long as we can create enough information, we could kill off the idea of doing something. I'm not a taxi, I'm not a limo, I'm not a car service, I'm barely a ride share, I'm just a little app here. We need to all sober up. Fingerprinting is the key. If we require it to serve liquor or to buy a gun, we're not asking a lot to make sure that our drivers get a thorough background check. I'd say to Uber and Lyft, welcome to Georgia, but we didn't fall off the pickup truck yesterday. I believe that the biggest threat that we face on this issue is gridlock and deadlock, and the way that we paralyze ourselves by making perfect the enemy of the good. No piece of legislation is perfect, but I would be the first to say that there were a lot of good things in last year's bill, and what the vast majority of testimony has verified through today. And I think we need to make sure we do the hard thinking and the hard analysis to be able to cover all the points to get the thing together. And I particularly salute all of you for taking the time. And I know, Representative Riley, you're going into a new job, and I know that job is going to have plenty of challenges, and there's really a lot of fine people who work in the Revenue Department. But you got a lot of crappy computers, and at the end of the day, those computers never give us the kind of information that industry wants, and I know the state wants. And I just know that what I experienced with the TAVT system, it took forever to get the right information. But this issue can be dealt with. I believe Mr. Bowers and Mr. Massey and Mr. Marsh are men of good faith, and I obviously will continue to work with them to try to get a bill that we all could live with. But if we're getting jerked around, then it takes the leadership of the General Assembly to say enough is enough. we need to get something done because the public is at risk. So I thank you for all the time you gave us this morning, and I'll be happy to answer any specific questions.
Caution to the committee, they're 45 minutes over on their time allotment. Anybody got a specific question for Mr. Snyder? Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Good news, bad news. They're now 45 minutes over, so that means Mr. Keys, as well as other folks who are signed up to speak, brevity is of a very important nature with this chairman. That being said, in the same vein of the presentation, I think we have folks who wish to make a very brief comment that are drivers of taxis. And first off, I want to call Alan Middlebrooks. Well, maybe you're not a driver. Do we have Alan Middlebrooks here? Very good. Scott McCundless, come on up. If you would take the podium.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Scott McCandless. I am a nominee for the Taxi Drivers Association of Atlanta and for president, and also the originator of the class action McCandless versus Uber Technologies. I'd like to kind of go over a little bit of the history that will really kind of explain the difference between exactly what a taxi cab and a limousine is, because, you know, so according to the statute, it's like, oh, well, a taxi cab is a vehicle for hire unless it's a limousine. And, you know, of course, the limousine definition says unmetered and prearranged construed together. Back in 1890, and even before, during Charles Dickens' time, they were just cabs. There were no taxi cabs, there were no limousines, there were private carriages, of course, but they were all just called cabs. And then in 1891, a gentleman by the name of Friedrich Wilhelm Gustav Brunn created and marketed the first commercially viable taximeter. That's what he called it. He invented the term taximeter, which is taken from either Latin or Greek, the taxi or taxa or taxe price meter. And in 1906, testimony before British House of Commons, he stated that a taximeter is a device that waits by time and drives by distance and computes a final price for the customer. Now, these things went on horse-drawn taxis for the most part. They weren't called taxis, and as a matter of fact, throughout that entire committee minutes, the term was taximeter cab. So nobody had ever used the word taxi cab until the next year, when Harry Nathaniel Allen created the New York Taxi Cab Company. And he understood, Harry Nathaniel Allen testified that, later in New York, that he understood taxi cab to mean metered cab. So what's the difference? So all the meter just does is determine how to compute the price. That's pretty simple. What's the difference if you compute the price by a meter or any other way? The difference is the meter gives you a pay for what you go. And if you have pay for what you go versus having to quote the price in advance. Quoting the price in advance is what you do if you don't have a metered system. Now, our current statute states unmetered and also states prearranged. Now, what the tricksters want to do is try and construe those two terms separately. They say, oh, well, I called you in advance, therefore prearranged is satisfied. And as far as unmetered, well, you know, we'd have to catch them using a meter. I said, well, but the rules of statutory construction require those be taken together. Prearranged and unmetered mean that the prearrangement must contain the finalized price because it's based on a contract, as also states in the statute, you know, 40 OCGA 41, 151, et cetera. So that's my main point, is that those terms need to be construed together. So any prearrangement needs to include the finalized price. If it didn't, then it would be an unconscionable contract. With the taxis, it includes the prearrangement or any kind of initiating of a taxi cab, a metered cab, is based with an agreement on the function of the price. But prearranged, unmetered, construed together means that the final price needs to be quoted at the beginning of the trip. If you can't, you know, otherwise, an unconscionable contract would be, you know, a contract that no honest man would offer or no sane man would accept. So that's my main point, is that prearranged, unmetered must be construed together. Otherwise, it's a taxi. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. No questions? Thank you. Next speaker, Steve Belcher. Can I again emphasize brevity?
You emphasize the right thing because I'm known to be a long talker, but I'm not going to be a long talker.
That's good because this chairman's been known to cut the speaker off.
Okay. I hear you. But anyway, I am. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning, to share with you some of my experiences in this plain old tale of truth as a taxi driver. I was a taxi driver and also a leader, and I was a former taxi cab industry association president and chairman, and I've been doing this for over 35 years. I think I would like to just tell you a little bit about myself, is that I've worked in corporate for Ford and Ford and Texaco, and one of the reasons why I mention that is because I have taken my experiences from other situations to apply a model to help the taxi industry to be professional as possible, and I think that it really has worked. And also, as we spent about about 2 terms, which is equivalent to 4 years on the board of directors of the Convention Bureau, and I was proud to be chosen the driver of the year for the city of Atlanta a couple of times, and also had articles that were written in terms of being an ambassador for the city of Atlanta. And I say that because it's very important that we understand, and that's what I want to talk about. A lot of things that I've heard today and have heard over the years is one industry fighting against the other one. But I think one of the things that we leave out is the importance of the passenger. You know, what do they think? What's important to them? So I want you to know that also that over this period of time, we have the Taxi Cab Bureau was created to help bring about some enforcement and some professionalism in the taxi cab industry. There were ordinances that were made that were, and I have participated at least in 90% of all the ordinances that was in this for the city of Atlanta. Now, when there was a sort of a group or team approach to every ordinance, it was something that anytime any ordinance is passed in the city of Atlanta, they had the mayor, of course, sign the ordinance, and the city council, public safety gets involved, the business community, the Atlanta Visitors Convention Bureau, Central Atlanta Progress, the Chamber of Commerce, Ron Fennell, and the taxi industry, the drivers, as well as the cab company owners. So I want you to know that we just don't want to just throw out the baby with the bath, as they say, just because somebody new is on the block. A lot of thought has been put into this industry, and for the sake of the passenger. Why? Because the city of Atlanta, as you know, is a major competitive convention city, and the state second amount of revenue is first is agriculture, second is conventions and city of Atlanta major insurance, stuff that you know. But I think it's important that people have worked very hard to bring about some ordinances that will work for the people. But I wanted to say too that just briefly here, speaking again about passengers. What do passengers expect? In a subliminal way, they kind of just expect to have just reasonable expectation. They want to feel safe. They get in a cab in the airport. They want to feel safe that they're going to make it downtown. They assume. I mean, this is something that I've heard here before, that there's a background check. They assume that the state and the city is taking care of things. They assume that the vehicle is going to be safe. And one of the credit to the state government, just in Georgia, is that we had, over the years, we've been through a lot, that we talk about now all the drivers have commercial insurance, but due to the thoughtfulness for the citizens of the state, we all have to have commercial insurance. Yes, we used to have self-insurance and that sort of thing, but independent drivers, but no, it's right now, it's considered we have to comply for the sake of the public. Some of the other things that are involved here also is the training of the drivers. As passengers expect customer service, they expect drivers to implement the golden rule. Treat people as you want to be treated. It's just that simple. A lot of books have been written on it, but that's what they expect. They expect people to know the different sites in Atlanta, the places to go, the restaurants, and that type of thing. But we get all of this stuff in training. They want a driver to be dressed properly. Does the driver have an ambassador spirit? In other words, we were taught that drivers are the first person that a person sees is a cab driver back in the day, for the most part. And people expect to have cabs in the city during the Olympics and other times. If they expect for drivers to understand the importance of hospitality. And all of these things we get into the city, but I'm just saying we get in our training. So the thing is that you can take this to the bank. Now, a driver ain't going to stand up and tell you like I am that enforcement is important. Nobody like to be enforced on anything, do we? Nobody like regulation. But the fact of the matter, I don't care what kind of driver you are, any kind of driver, you know that if you can get away with it, you're going to get away with something. So drivers got to have some regulations and enforcement. Take that to the bank. Now, the other thing I want to say is right quickly is that in terms of the ordinances, some things have been mentioned here, but I want you to know that there was a lot of thought, as I said, for years of these people who I mentioned earlier, of the city, the stakeholders, the state, the city, the business community, in terms of ordinances that have been passed. They said that it's reasonable for drivers to have a background check. Well, we've been talking about that's important. Fingerprinting. A letter. Each cab company owner have to check their drivers out. They have to be accountable before they even send them to be a driver. And of course, the training of the drivers. Taxi cab drivers have to spend $40, $50 themselves to be trained, to be a professional cab driver, for continuing education. That's what we say. Oh, the doctors, we're going to get. Well, we want to be professionals. Some do. A lot of us don't. Some of them don't. But the idea is this: is that customer service is all of these things that we get into in the training. We also get driver safety. One of taxi drivers used to be the most dangerous job that was occupation. But we learned how to be safe, and we also have to learn how to be. And in this class, we have to learn the different ordinances. Taxi drivers I want you to know that this is something established. There ain't no drive-by-night thing. Drivers have to go through this every year. And training is for 8 hours a day. At least 8 hours for this type of training. Also, there are semi-annual inspections of the Taxi Cab Bureau. their age requirement, that all of these things have been discussed again by a multitude of people. There's a color code for identification of the taxi cab. There's passengers' rights. We came up with say, look, passengers have rights. In other words, they should deserve an air conditioner. Some of the guys don't want to put on air conditioning, but people have got to have that air. So I've seen a great improvement in that. But we have inspectors that inspect the cars on site at the bureau as well as off site on the hotels, the airport. They come around and check. There are rate signs inside and outside of the taxis to make sure there's no question, there's no overcharging, how much the price is going to be, and that sort of thing. So I'm just saying there is a lot of work that has been involved with driving a taxi. Now, I would just kind of say in brevity, sum up that we do need to take a look at this doggone Uber thing situation. Because I'm just saying there's no regulation. They don't pay fees at the airport. Drivers have to sit out there 4 or 5 hours to wait for a trip, and they pay for a fee to get a fare. Uber just pulled on up, do what they want to do. Come on now. That same thing downtown. And so also I was looking, you check your email out, look up Uber, and they advertise for part-time. Oh, come on, just drive for us for Christmas, get some extra money. All right? For a taxi driver, this is a full-time business. Taxi drivers work 7 days a week, at least 12 hours a day. And if you're self-employed, you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. You just have to force yourself to get some rest. But in order to keep up with all the fees of what you have to do to be a taxi driver in this city, that's what you have to do. So I just wanted to know, yes, it has been brought up. There are reasons, think about it, there are reasons why they have been banned in France, Birmingham, and all of these other places. Check it out. And again, how could you have any system that is not regulated? All the way, I would just say the traveling public, does the traveling public and the local visitors of an international city deserve a minimum requirement for transportation drivers, or do we deserve the best? This is the best state. This is the best city. We are competing. We all make money. The state of Georgia, the city of Atlanta, livelihoods are made for that. So I think we should just take these things under consideration as you take a look at this legislation and some things that we can make it be in the transportation industry a even playing field for not the taxi cab industry so much, not so much for Uber, whatever the hell you pronounce it, but for the passengers, for people. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay. You have any questions, sir?
No, sir. No, sir. We have Mr. McDowell. And I'm not even going to say the word brevity because it's obvious that nobody understands that.
Thanks for this opportunity to speak here. I'm one of the trainers at Checker Cab. When I first came to Checker Cab in 2009, I was told that if I worked hard and treat my customers right, I would make money in this industry, and that's what I did. I know all about working hard because I'm a disabled veteran from the United States Navy, and I was looking for a new opportunity. And as time went on, I became a supervisor at Checker Cab, and I'm a trainer there. And out of the 102 new drivers, 27 of those drivers didn't make it because of background checks. There's nothing that I could do about it. There's nothing that Rick could do about it. There's nothing we can do about it because if you had a felony, regardless of how smart you were, we could not put you on the road for public safety. And it was hard for me, the driver, when they come to the class, they don't know that. So they already paid $100 for the class. They already paid for all of that. And then they go to the city, and the city say, no, you got to pass the background. You have a felony. So they're just too bad, and they're just part of the training process. And then we also train the drivers again to know how they work on the road. We want to know how they drive. We want to know how they treat customers. And then we'll give them a car if we feel comfortable. And most of them, if they pass the background check, typically does well on the road. We did have one driver that slipped through the system. It wasn't our fault. The city driver's City of Atlanta fault, and found out later that he had a background. He did have a felony, and it proved that felony. The system works because that driver was a very, very bad driver, and that's how we found out he slipped through the system. So we know that the background and fingerprinting system works very, very well. And but I just want to say that I know a lot of drivers because I'm a trainer. And this is the first time that I see so many drivers are suffering. They're suffering financially. They're going through very difficult times right now. And I know drivers that also work for Uber because they used to be taxi cab drivers, and they are suffering. So the only person that's winning is really Uber, because Uber has oversaturated the market, so that the only Uber with an 800, 900% in profit increase, while the Uber drivers are not making money because they oversaturated the market, and the cab drivers are not making money. And we still have people right now in downtown Atlanta looking for a taxi. You know why they can't find a taxi? Because all the taxis are now undercover in some, private cars. And most of the people that's not from Atlanta that's visiting, they're not going to get in any car unless it's a taxi. And I had a lady that said she waited an hour on Peachtree Street looking for a cab. And she said a guy put up, said, I'm a taxi, come here, I'm for Uber. She wouldn't get in she wouldn't get it because she didn't feel safe. So all I want to say is that we heard all of this and all of that, but I just really want the committee to think about a lot of drivers have been working 10, 15, 20, and 30 years, and now they're undergoing so much financial difficulty. And I really would like for you guys to consider how we have to take care of our families. We have kids in college, and I'm trying to start a new taxi cab company in the south side of Atlanta, and the rules and regulations is this thick. That I have to prepare this much paperwork in College Park, Clayton County, and Henry County to even think about putting the taxi on the road down there. So the rules and regulations is tough down there. I'm getting this thing in order so I can go by all the rules and the regulations that the city requires, and also the county. They both have two requirements. You got to go through the city, and you have to go through the county in order for me to operate in the south side. So I just think that that's good. It's good for the public, and it's good for the company, and everybody's happy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I hope you think about the financial difficulty that we're going through right now.
Thank you, Freddie. Sean Draffin.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Sean Draffin. Just like Freddie, I'm a trainer and a driver also with Checker Cab. And the two gentlemen before me already kind of explained and delved into the requirements that is required by the city to drive in Atlanta. But I'll dive a little bit more into the financial hardship that our drivers are going through right now. And I'll start with this. In 1937, Mayor LaGuardia signed into act the HAZA Act, and that implemented the medallion because the city was overrun with. It started a lot of taxi cabs started coming into the city and conducting business, and it put a strain on the wagers, just kind of like how it is doing right now with Uber. Uber probably has about, in my estimate, about 5,000 drivers driving through the city, and the permitted taxi drivers is only 1,600 permitted cabs to drive in the city. So with all of those drivers coming in, and then on top of that, the undercutting the wages that are set by the city, it's kind of hard to compete with those with those fares. I mean, with the fares, and it's kind of hard to compete with the fares, and and also to pay for our lease, pay to keep up with all of our requirements to drive in the city, and I think that like we all said, competition is good. I compete with Yeah, as with Checker Cab, we compete with 21 other companies in the 21 other taxi companies in the city, and I'm pretty sure Uber has enough money to go through all the regulations, all the requirements that we all have to do also as a taxi cab service, and it's kind of unfair to just single us out and have us continue to pay these pay to be paying regulated and these licenses and our fees when they also don't have to. Also, another thing, traffic has even gotten even worse with all these drivers coming in. If you go to Buckhead on Roswell Road, right in front of East Andrews Bar, you at about 2:45 in the morning on a Sunday morning, this crowded with cars. It used to be a little bit regulated with taxis, where taxis can just move on in, pick up people, and keep going. But now with so many Uber cars, Lyft cars, that it's hard to get through there. And there's a fire station that sits right there. And I'm pretty sure each time alarm goes off, it's hard to get through that crowd. So you have that also, that safety concern of the traffic and moving through the flow of traffic within any time zone of rush hours, and our strain on our wages, and that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you so much. And there is a question, if you'll wait 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just real quick. Are you a cab driver now?
Yes, sir.
Do you own the cab?
No, sir.
How many cab drivers own their own cab? Is there do some cab drivers own the cab?
Not with the Checker Cab company. They have it with the sister company, Metro Cab, owns the CP&C number, the Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience. I'm not sure how many of those. I'm not sure the numbers on that side of the because I'm just concerned with Checker, but and there's also other drivers without the city. I'm not sure the number of how many drivers own throughout the whole city owns their own CP&C number, but there are quite many of them, especially with Yellow Cab and other companies as such.
Are drivers paid by the hour, by the fare, by the percentage? I mean, how?
We're paid by the fare, and then we pay with Checker Cab. I pay a lease every week, and that's how. And the difference between the lease and how much I make in fares, that's the income that I get, that I receive, that most drivers receive with Checker Cab.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Clark Mayfield. The most important man here today. All right, Mr. Keys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm John Keys. I'm representing the Georgia Motor Coach Operators Association. We are 42 motor coach companies all over the state of Georgia and about 200 drivers. We are also 200 associate members representing the hospitality industry, the hotel lodging industry, tourist attractions, and so forth. We are the folks who deliver customers to businesses all over the state, and encouraging economic development, generating a lot of tax revenue. We play by the rules. We weren't able to be with you yesterday because our drivers and operator companies were in a rodeo, R-O-A-D-E-O, competition. It's a driving skills and training session. We had representatives from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Compliance Administration, and we also had Georgia Department of Public Safety folks bringing our folks up to speed on rules and regs. So we are concerned about safety. I'd like to refer you to the letter that's in your packet to Representative Powell from the last session of the legislature. It's dated February 28. It's a little dated, but the issues remain the same. It's great to see what attention has been focused, and we applaud Representative Powell for his introduction of legislation this past session. The issues are much clearer now as a result of a lot of discussion, as a result of a lot of what's going on in this country, and they've been fleshed out very good. That's an excellent video. It captures all all the issues. And primarily our folks, we don't want anybody to think that the motor coach industry is an enemy of technology. I don't think anybody in this room is an enemy. We're friends of technology. All we ask is that transportation providers, no matter how that transportation is provided, be subject to the same, and you've heard this, and I'm just going to say it again, to the same rules, regulations, and tax policies, and playing by the same rules that we are. And that's all that we're asking, and we are confident that y'all will do that. That's all I have to say, but we would be delighted to answer any questions you might have, and we look forward to working with you this coming session. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. For
Thank you, John, and we appreciate it. No questions? Thank you. We have a representative from the Georgia Sheriff's Association. And you're the stand-in for Mr. Norris.
Yes, sir.
Good to have you here. Thank you.
I'll be real brief, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, we appreciate the opportunity. My name's Chad Hunton. I'm a lieutenant colonel with Paulding County Sheriff's Office. I represent Sheriff Gary Gullidge, and today I'm representing the Georgia Sheriff's Association. On the matter of speaking of public safety, obviously we're going to support the issue of the background checks and the fingerprinting of the drivers, that the discussion that's taking place today. So that's all I have to say, sir. Y'all have a good day.
You are a fine gentleman, I just have to tell you. But you would be, but I'm presuming, but just basically with your brief comments, is that, you know, if you got someone out there because of the nature of the business, that people are driving for hire, where the consuming public does not know who these people are, that the public has a right to know that they've been properly vetted, that they're not a convicted felon or the such.
Yes, sir. We support the criminal background checks. That's
Thank
correct.
you so much.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. Any questions? All right, last but not...
If I may, I just wanted to say that from authority that the vast majority of cab drivers in the city do own their cabs. To answer your question.
Thank you. All right. Folks, we're going to try to move on through this because Representative Riley's is trying to see if she can push a luncheon back to 1 o'clock. We've got two more groups that we want to hear from, and I would basically say to the committee, we have DDS, and we'll get them to be very brief in how they give an explanation of what they currently do. And then maybe we can ask them some questions and maybe give them some directions about possibilities as far as attachments to driver's licenses that would guarantee background checks and such. And the other one's going to be our friends from the Revenue Department. It's such a lovely day to see y'all. 5-minute break, and then we're going to try to finish up in 45 minutes and be out here by 1 o'clock. We're going to reconvene, and we're going to see if we can't pile through this pretty quick. We have two agencies to address the committee. We have Department of Driver Services, and we have the Department of Revenue. And if the members might be so inclined to ask specific questions, they're going to give us just a little bit of a briefing of what they do. Most of y'all already know that over at Driver Services, we know their functions, even though they have more functions than most people know. They're in charge of the licensing, driver's licensing, and in relation to this, primarily, they do the limousine attachments that goes on a driver's license. And keep in mind, bear in mind that that's not a necessity for taxi drivers, since taxi operators are regulated by the cities and counties, and also the ride-sharing folks. Obviously, there's no specific criteria on their license. That being said, they may be at the pointing edge of trying to find a solution to a recorded background check for any driver that wants to be a for-hire driver at some point, or at least that's the talk. And I'm going to turn this over to y'all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Mike Mitchell. I'm the legislative liaison for the Department of Driver Services. To my right is my colleague, Keisha Bivens. Keisha is the Division Director of the Regulatory Compliance Division, which is the division at Driver Services that credentials the chauffeurs. The chauffeur process came over to DDS in 2005. We inherited it from the Public Service Commission. It was part of House Bill 501, which was the piece of legislation that actually created the Department of Driver Services. At the time the chauffeurs came to DDS, the limousine carriers remained at the Public Service Commission. So the regulatory oversight was split between two different state agencies. Just within the past few years, the limousine carriers moved from the Public Service Commission over to the State Patrol. So the State Patrol actually oversees the carriers today. We still have the chauffeurs. The statutory authority for regulating the chauffeurs is found in OCGA 40-5-39. It's also found in agency rules, Chapter 375-5-5. As of December 1st, there were 4,785 active license holders who had chauffeur endorsements. So that number is a little bit updated from what Les Schneider shared with you. The numbers that Les provided, I believe, were September. So it has increased somewhat. And as Les alluded to in his testimony, in fiscal year 2014, 2 staff members processed 2,629 applications for chauffeur endorsements. And just a very quick breakdown, 2,100 of those applications resulted in approvals. 460 were rejected because the applications were incomplete. 62 were denied because of background issues, and 7 applications were withdrawn by the applicant for some reason. So that sort of gives you an idea of what the volume is in terms of the chauffeur endorsements. As the chairman mentioned, today we do not regulate taxi drivers, and we do not regulate Uber, obviously. It's just the drivers that drive the limousines here in the state of Georgia. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Keisha and let her just sort of briefly explain what the criteria is for obtaining a chauffeur endorsement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For an applicant to meet the criteria to become a chauffeur, they must be at least 18 years of age. They must hold and possess a valid Georgia driver's license. They must pass a state and national criminal background check. They must also be a U.S. citizen or have legal presence to be in the U.S. They must drive for a limousine company that has a limousine carrier certificate certified by the Georgia Department of Public Safety. So they submit their application to us along with the $15 application fee. They also have to submit a letter from the limousine carrier saying that they intend to hire this particular person to work for that company. The term of the chauffeur endorsement is tied to their expiration date of the driver's license. So driver's licenses now are either come on a 5-year term or an 8-year term. And for the non-U.S. citizens, their chauffeur endorsement is tied to the expiration of their immigration documents.
All right. That's a pretty short presentation. That's about what this committee wanted to hear. If I might ask a couple of questions, and I'm just going to ask these because it's been kind of a movable feast in my mind about trying to hem this issue up about the background checks. Obviously, anything we come up with is changed depending on whose testimony, and trying to, a couple of things trying to do, or that I foresee that needs to be done. First and foremost, create a level playing field. Whether you're a transportation referral driver or you're a limo operator or you're a taxi driver, create a level playing field on as much areas as we can. One of those is background checks. Certainly insurance would be one of them. Taxation, revenue, the issues of paying your fair share of the taxes is another. Vehicle inspections or the requirement of a safe vehicle is another. But in this issue, say we say we passed a piece of legislation that first that the rule of the you have to work for a limo company. If Alan Powell, with my driver's license, and I'm vaguely familiar with driver's license issues, I have a motorcycle attachment that I've had for years on my driver's license. Say I wanted a, quote, chauffeur's attachment, or if it was changed, the name was changed for a for-hire driver attachment. Would that take legislation to, or is that rule or reg that stated you had to work for a limousine company to have a chauffeur's attachment?
That is in DDS rules and regulations.
That is. So that could be changed rapidly. All right. If we were across the board and a process was put forth to say the folks with Checker Cab, the folks with Green Limousine, the folks with Uber or Lyft, they run companies. They have a number of folks. If they were registering as a company with DDS and we were allowing them to pre-vet or to do the vetting. You know, we've heard so much about how Uber and Lyft, you know, they put so much stock in their process, which I'm still not exactly sold that that a company can still do a full vetting of a background without a criminal background check. But say that we wanted to do this so that all of these companies, in fairness, that they could that they were all on the same playing field. That if you were going to be a driver, a for-hire driver, and we define for-hire driver as any one of these driving for any venue, that to do this, could y'all contract or to establish a system that they could pre-vet, send electronically their electronic list of prospective drivers, and then y'all scrutinize that to speed up the process, almost like over at Revenue Department when you want to tag in a title, or if you want to tag title done expedited, they have an expedited fee for doing that. Is that a possibility with y'all?
Let me mention something about the pre-vetting that sort of concerns me. The criminal history results many times that we see are quite extensive, and it requires a bit of skill to go through it, because we're looking at criminal history results that are not only coming back through the state of Georgia but also nationally. So a lot of times we have to interpret it, especially an out-of-state conviction. We have to interpret what that means. Some courts out of state use certain sentences that we're not familiar with. So a lot of times they're not that easy to interpret. So if the decision is made to bring Uber under the regulatory oversight of DDS, we would like to vet those in-house.
Well, when I'm saying pre-vetting, we've heard what Uber and Lyft said yesterday. They put so much stock in their third-party background checks. But we also heard from some of the industry, taxi industry and limo industry today, that they've had people that passed the, as far as the criminal background, but they still wouldn't put them on as drivers. That's what I'm talking about, pre-vetting. Now, at the end of the day, if they want to scrutinize and screen, if they're going to do it as a company, to put forth a series of names electronically transferred to y'all so that they're paying for this, at the end of the day, that y'all would still be looking at the GCIC report. My idea of pre-vetting, if any of these companies are going to be paying for it, then it's up to them to pre-vet all they want to. But at the end of the day, when y'all are issuing that certificate or the attachment for a driver's license, that y'all would be doing it based on the credentials. And the credentials are, just quite frankly, a handful of them. No sexual offenders, most felonies. And just take a look to see what is decided on with, what is what's a concern to folks? Do we want people out there driving folks, not only that have been convicted sex molesters, but people who've been armed robbers and things like this?
So, Mr. Chairman, would the criminal history results then go back to the company before coming to us, or?
Well, that's what I'm asking y'all. Y'all are the professionals in this. One of the things that the GCIC expert said yesterday was, and I at that time was thinking about a background GCIC report that was sent, but it's like they had told me that one of the things that came out crystal clear was that in the case of the NCIC report, when you're doing the interstate and the national, through the national database, there's some things by the feds can't be sent to private entities. That means y'all are the only ones that can look at that information.
And that is correct. And the way it works as well, the purpose code that someone uses when they run a criminal history check may determine or may dictate what they can actually see on the criminal history.
All right.
Some information is restricted.
Yeah.
We can see certain information that an employer may not necessarily be able to
Right.
see.
But in this particular case, the only thing we need for y'all to see is once the rules are established of what it takes to have one of these certificates based on a background check, criminal background check, can y'all simplify that enough so that it rapidly speeds it up? I know that one of the things that was said from the ride transportation folks yesterday basically has come out is, and and the arguments that are coming out of this seem to be interesting how they change. Last session when 907 was introduced, they were more concerned about DDS's involvement because they were, quite frankly, they were concerned about corporate trade secrets. They were afraid that if this happened, that one company didn't want the other company to know who was driving for them because they might go in and steal their drivers. It all seems to be more about the corporate operations more than it is about the public safety, and that's what concerned me. And I'm not giving up on this idea about the public safety issue.
I think our preference, Mr. Chairman, would be for those criminal history results to come back directly to us.
That's exactly right.
I mean, the process right now is completely automated. The fingerprints are transmitted electronically from the fingerprint location to GCIC. The checks are done. The criminal history results come to us electronically, so Keisha's staff can log into a secure website, see what the results were. They can interpret that and make a decision as to whether or not to credential someone.
And do you foresee, Keisha, that this could be done on a rapid scale? Because the other argument they had is they don't, the ride-sharing folks, and I'm sure it means a lot to the taxi limo operators, that, if they've got someone that needs to have this license to be a driver. And I'm talking about if we do this across the board so that no matter who you are, if you're a driver, a for-hire driver, you have to have this attachment. That would stand as an across-the-board simple answer about so that everybody's on the same playing field. But I know that they don't want to have to send something in and then all of a sudden it take 7, 10, 30 days to get done. It needs to be on a more expedited manner. Is that a possibility?
I believe it's something that we can accomplish, but right now, as mentioned before, we only have 2 full-time staff members that process the over 2,600 applications in the past fiscal year. So, for instance, if our workload doubled, we would probably need at least 2 additional staff members to handle that workload. As far as expediting those applications, I think it's something that definitely could be done, but we just have to have the resources to be able to accommodate the
and possibly restructuring and a more template design of what you've got to do. I mean, the restructuring and the reinventing of this process that y'all have would help to move it forward even quicker, and then basically see what the manpower and what the cost is involved and let it all be broke down accordingly for reimbursement. Is that?
And Mr. Chairman, I might add, one of the things that makes us a little bit nervous is the fact that we don't know how many of these drivers there are out there. So we don't know what our volume's going to be, and I think, the 2 additional staff members that Keisha mentioned, that's a pretty conservative estimate. I mean, it would be nice to know how many people we're going to expect to go through the process in order to really make a good estimate.
Well, all I can say, when you're dealing with California companies, you ain't going to get that answer. I mean, I don't expect it, and I don't want to delve into corporate trade secrets and the such. So that's going to be part of part of the dilemma that we're going to have to deal with. So, questions from the committee?
What's the fee for the chauffeurs? What license attachment? What is the fee they have to pay?
The application fee is $15. And then there's an additional fee to get the background check done through GAPS, the Georgia Applicant Processing System. That fee is $52.75.
Okay.
But the $15 comes to DDS.
So if I applied today, how long would it take me today to get that attachment?
If you submitted a completed application with all of your supporting documents, you go ahead and get your fingerprinting done. It could take anywhere between 7 and 14 days on average.
And we're always at the mercy of the customer giving us everything that we need. If the application is incomplete, that's going to, lengthen the amount of time it takes us to credential the driver. Keisha and I were talking earlier about 70% of the applications that she gets are incomplete, and that creates a lot of strain.
Which, if I was an individual, that'd be the burden on me if I wanted to apply go to the DDS office and do my GCIC, fill out all of that. That burden would be on me. Correct. If we had a system so that the Ubers and the Greens and the Checkers and all of them and the Lyfts, I'm sorry, Joe, I keep putting Uber before I do Lyft, and it's just because it's ingrained. But if it was a system set up so that all of these companies were handling their own then they would also have a template of saying, this is our pre-vetting. We want all this paperwork filled out correctly. Then they submit it to y'all, and it would be a more rapid process if all the material was complete.
Yes,
So,
provided we had the resources to accommodate it.
good deal. Representative Carson.
I just want to make a comment, Mr. Chairman. If we could get a copy from DDS of the forms that are required to apply for a chauffeur's license, and I think, sorry, is it online? If it's online, fantastic. I think it would be helpful as an appendix, or at least in our review when we go into executive session for our recommendations. Compare what DDS needs for a form, compare what Uber, Lyft, other TNCs, and compare that also to, we didn't ask this of GMA, I don't know if we can go to all the cities in Georgia but that have taxis, but just basically compare what is required, what are the due diligence procedures. Please don't send us a manual, but just a page or two of what is done. Is it fingerprint? Is it background check? Is it Social Security check? Whatever that list is, hopefully it's on one page. Just as a comment, I think that would be helpful.
Good. Thank you.
We have the chauffeur endorsement application here today for you. 2-page application.
And Abby, could you ask the same from GMA if they could provide that for maybe the main municipalities that have taxi operations? I guess Atlanta, probably Marietta, Athens. I can't think of many others.
Mr. Donahue.
That was a main question I was going to ask for the same literature, and let me ask you a continuation of that. Pretty much 2 pages, and I understand that you send this off and it's 14 days. 2 people working 40 hours a week, which it's hard to see people continuously do that. You need more staff. What takes the most time in an application? I know you just made a comment that a lot of it's not filled out, and then you have to go back and research. I do understand that, but what takes so long about a 2-page application?
Well, the processing of the application itself, a lot of times there are documents that are omitted. The person might submit their application, but they have not yet gone through the background check. So there's a lot of going back and forth. We have to email the customer, call them. Sometimes they don't sign the consent for us to do the background. We have to run an MVR. So there's a lot of going back and forth. And then, like Mike said, interpreting 30 or 40-page criminal background.
Yes, ma'am.
Takes some time as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, one other thing. Applicants that are denied are entitled to an administrative hearing. So if we introduce new drivers into the mix, we could see the number of appeal cases go up. So that would be more caseload for our attorneys.
Well, this would have to be computed just like the price of issuing a driver's license.
Sure.
You know, generally what we've always done is sitting on fee structures so as it doesn't become a tax. And that's if we know it cost $500,000 to perform a service, then that's generally broke up by the number of licensees, so it is supposed to be paying for its own way.
Sure.
Excuse me, Representative Rutledge.
Yeah, just one other. Once I get an attachment as a limo driver on my driver's license, what don't I have to get a tag from my vehicle as well and register, get a tag on? I mean, what is the process for that? As far as, do I have to get a tag on my vehicle so it's identified as a limo?
You know, I think I have to defer to revenue on that since they handle the tags.
Would it be like an apportionment tag or like?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the carriers are regulated by public safety, so that's a different aspect. We only regulate the chauffeur driver.
Limo operators out there, we got several of them out there. Do you have to have a limo tag on your limousine? Taxi drivers, do you have to have a taxi signified?
And I could be a one-man limo service? Do I have to, so I can get a license and I can get a tag on my vehicle and then go park anywhere I want to because I've got limo on my tag and get to special events? And I mean, I was just curious about how that works. Interesting.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, Department of Revenue. While DDS is also important, we now are talking to the folks who are the most important folks because they're the ones who raise money to pay for all of this.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Amy One-Acre, Assistant Director for Legal Affairs and Tax Policy, Department of Revenue. We're happy to be here. We found out about this meeting kind of last minute. I did want to opine on just a couple of things if I could really quickly, though. Firstly, I did want to highlight that our computer systems at the Department of Revenue are actually very state-of-the-art. Our department in the state has spent many dollars over the past 6 or so years to integrate virtually every single tax type onto one integrated system. And our querying and data retrieval capabilities are better than they ever have been ever. With that, I would like to say that the data that we can query out of our system is only as good as the data that is in the system. And so as it relates to that and our ability to be able to query information regarding taxes collected from taxi cab companies or limo companies is limited because we have very little to query on. And quite frankly, the only thing that we can query on is some type of industry classification code, which currently today we use NAICS codes. So there's certain constraints embedded in that. Number one, the taxpayer selects their own NAICS code. We do not assign it to them. So when they register with us, they tell us what their code is, and we don't question them. We enter it into our system. And so if they have entered the inaccurate NAICS code, if they did not enter an NAICS code, then we won't have that data in our system that we can query on. In addition, the department used to query based on industry codes, SIC codes, which are not as specific as NAICS codes. And sometime many years ago, and I don't know the exact date, the department converted from an SIC system to an NAICS system, and they converted the SIC codes that were in the system to the best known NAICS code that they could, and it was very electronic and automatic. And so we know that every limo and cab or transportation service provider is not coded correctly in our system. So we can't just query for the two primary limo and cab driver NAICS codes and give you an accurate result as to what we are currently collecting in sales and use taxes for taxis and limos. So with that, I do have some information that I can share with you. And Mr. Chairman, I know you invited us to come down last year. We talked about this during the legislative session at that time, and there was an inquiry regarding whether or not we could indicate the amount of sales and use taxes that we did collect from these companies. And we cautioned at that time the limitations and constraints and our ability to give you that data as I just outlined. And at that time, when we met, we queried two NAICS codes, which are 485310 and 485320, which I believe are the two primary limo cab driver NAICS codes, for 1 month, and that was for the month of October 2013. And what we found is that 152 returns were filed. So 152 businesses filed returns, and for that month of October 2013, $269,126.60 was collected in sales and use tax. So if you extrapolate that over a 12-month period, and again, this is just for the two NAICS codes that we know are right, and 152 returns, that's $3,229,519.20. I asked this morning the folks that helped me run this report last year, I said, I'm going to this meeting and I know it's last minute, but if you can produce if you can run that same query for me that you did last year for this year, can you please let me know the numbers? And they sent me an email just about an hour ago, and they ran the exact same report, and ironically, only 93 returns were filed for the month of October 2014, which is 1 year over year, versus the 152 returns filed in October the previous year. So this could indicate many things. There's fewer people filing taxes, obviously, or people are going out of business in light of the fact that there are other transportation service options out there. I don't know the answer to that, but 93 returns were filed, and $211,514 and some change was filed for the month of October 2014. Again, extrapolated at 12 months is $2,538,540 and some change. So, certainly we know that we're just querying the two codes that exist. We know that there were only 152 returns filed in the test month in 2013 and only 93 returns filed in the test month in October 2014. So if you compare those numbers, or an average number per driver or per return, and extrapolate that out into the total number of drivers in the state, it might give you a better indication as to what the actual collections might be. But unfortunately, we can't pull that exact data for you with any kind of accuracy that we would be comfortable to tell you that it was true and correct. That is all I have in terms of prepared remarks, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Well, that was certainly a mouthful.
It is past lunchtime, and I like to be brief.
Well, you know what, and I do appreciate it. I want to just ask you a couple of questions. Sure. First off, is it under the Georgia statute, these transportation, whether it be a taxi, a limo, or a ride sharing, anytime there is money that is charged as a for-hire service for transportation, under Georgia law, is that not applicable that sales taxes are paid?
Sales taxes are due on retail sales, and the sale of transportation is a retail sale. So yes.
All right. And also, would the companies that run these, would they not also be applicable to pay their corporate sales tax? Their corporate income tax?
I would argue to the extent that they meet the qualifications to have to pay income tax, they probably would, yes.
All right. And I guess I'm sort of the bind, because I know that there's a strict line that you can't step over. So we can't ask if anybody is paying their tax. That I know of, we can't ask, or can we? Under Open Records Act, can we see if that a certain company is paying taxes?
We cannot disclose confidential taxpayer information, and giving you aggregate numbers, as I just did, is perfectly okay. But if you called me up and said, hey, how much money in sales tax did the
No, I understand you
Walmart in
can't get
so-and-so
into the
county, I
individual,
couldn't
but
tell you that.
but is it a matter of public record if we want to make an inquiry under open records whether say green transportation, are they in fact paying sales tax? Can I ask that question or not?
You could ask that question, but we will not give you an answer because we cannot disclose the
information. It's not just the amount.
Yes.
It's you can't even ask anything about a taxpayer's information, whether they're paying or not.
That's correct.
So how do we ever find out who's cheating the government?
You can ask them. You can ask who you suspect's cheating the government.
Well, that's been tried.
Well, I assure you that the Department of Revenue has many, many means, and especially with our integrated tax system, even better means to do audit selection, to identify businesses who should be registered and are not, and we have greater ability than ever to be able to identify and locate and investigate taxpayers who we believe are not filing taxes correctly, and I assure you that we actively do that every day.
I've got one last question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to pass the mic. You know, we've talked about all of this, and I really wish y'all could have heard some of the discussion yesterday, but there's been a lot of things that's been laid out on the table. Backgrounds, insurance, that's none of y'all's concern. Y'all's concern is the tax laws of the state of Georgia. One of the things that came up yesterday, there's been negotiations between the different parties, the new business model of the ride sharing, the taxi limo folks and their attorneys about a better way. You know, we understand that we have a voluntary system of paying sales tax. Either you pay or you don't pay, and if you don't want to pay, then you know you might get by with it forever and never have to pay unless a DOR audits you. And there's been an idea that has been broached of negotiations of maybe doing it as a sticker instead of paying a sales tax. Figure out what would normally come into the state of Georgia, divide it by the number of participant drivers and such, and basically charge an annual or a semi-annual fee or something. That's a simpler way of looking at it, but would that actually work, in your opinion?
I think another alternative could absolutely work. I mean, the system as it's structured today is very, very complex. It gets particularly complex when you have a bunch of independent drivers who don't drive under perhaps a checker cab name or a yellow cab name or whatever, and it's kind of like newspaper hawkers. In fact, Georgia law has a nice little piece of information in the code that says that we can force sales tax at the wholesale level. When AJC sells newspapers to the newspaper hawker, they can charge sales tax on the retail selling price of the paper to that person because they know that the guy who's selling newspapers on the street is not going to be collecting sales and use tax. And that exact same argument is the one that is used in the Adam Cab case that Les Snyder referenced earlier, which was a Supreme Court case that was very favorable to the state that said that, you know, tax could be imposed on the headquarters company of a cab system instead of the individual driver. But that gets really complex when the headquarter company has no idea which fares their drivers are doing. Sometimes they just pay them they charge them a weekly or a monthly fee to drive under their name, and they may not dispatch a fare to them at all. They may go sit at the airport all day and just take rides all day, and the headquarters company has no idea how many fares they're driving. So I assure you there are loopholes in the system, and would like to think that there is a better way.
Simplicity might work. That's all I'm going to ask. And we have a Mr. Carson.
Yeah, I did some research, and I thank you for being here today, Amy. OCGA Title 48, which is the revenue code, and it's very appropriate we have the revenue commissioner on your study committee, Mr. Chairman. I want to applaud you for that. OCGA Section 48, 8 to 31, paragraph, and then leading into subparagraph A. It says the retail sale or sale at retail means any sale, lease, or rental for any purpose other than for resale, sublease, or subrents, yada, yada. The terms retail, sale, or sale at retail included but are not limited to the following, and I'm sure Amy has read this many times. Except as otherwise provided in this chapter, the sale of natural or artificial gas, oil, electricity, solid fuel, transportation, local telephone services, alcoholic beverages, and tobacco products when made to any purchaser for purposes other than for resale. So clearly, transportation is a taxable event.
That's correct.
How can I phrase this the right way? We understand that Uber and possibly other TNCs are in discussions with the DOR in regard to sales and use tax owed. Can you confirm that?
I cannot.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a comment. Maybe possibly to our friends from Uber, I don't know what there is to discuss if the code says that transportation taxes are within the realm of sales and use tax.
If I may, I can say that the department has looked at I think a good synonymous example that I feel like I can talk about freely with you is related to hotel intermediary companies. Not to call anybody out, but the companies that you go to online and you can get a hotel room online and it's not the actual hotel that's providing you with an accommodation service. And there were many cases, and there still are many cases all over the country regarding these third-party services who solicit hotel rooms, airfares, things of that nature on behalf of Hilton and Marriott and everybody else. That you can go and you can buy a hotel room there, and those entities in general were not also collecting sales tax on this marked up rate that they charged for a hotel room on their site. And those cases went to court here in Georgia, and actually a City of Atlanta case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they lost. And they, as a result, had to collect hotel motel taxes in the City of Atlanta, which then resulted in our ability, the Department of Revenue, to capitalize on that and work with them to also make sure they were paying the appropriate sales and use taxes. And so as it relates to these transportation service companies, I think that their model is very, very similar to that. And if not similar to that, certainly the Adams cab case would apply, not to mention the straight language of the statute as you outlined.
May I ask?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Could you describe the group that was offering those hotel rooms in that case you just gave? Were they an intermediary? In other words, they were locating you to a hotel or locating you to a housing facility of some sort, or were they the one actually providing the housing, actually providing the facility?
They were just facilitating you. They were hooking you up with an accommodation.
Because the TNCs have told us that they're just a facilitator, they're just a communicator. But now you're telling us there is court case, whereas such an intermediary, quote unquote, is liable to collect and remit that sales and use tax in the case of hotel accommodations.
Yes.
And to your knowledge, is there any, be interesting to see from a legal standpoint, is there anything going on in Georgia in regard to the sales and use tax or anywhere else in the United States?
I don't think she can answer that question.
As it relates to the transportation service companies?
Right.
Well, I mean, I believe, I don't know of a case right offhand, but I am almost certain. I know Les Snyder indicated that there's, these companies are oftentimes in the news every other day or multiple times a day, and I know I've read articles of other jurisdictions who are using the courts to argue certain things that they may or may not be doing correctly. But we've also stated in this committee hearing that Georgia is one of the few states that actually imposes a tax on transportation services.
Right.
So I am not immediately aware of any court proceedings as it relates to sales tax on these services in another state.
Can you confirm that these TNCs, such as Uber, Lyft, and others, and their competitors in the market for this particular market, can you confirm that they are submitting 1099s electronically to the DOR?
I am not aware of that. I don't know the answer to that.
In other words, the 1099s that for what they pay their contracted drivers, that you're not aware.
I do not know the answer to that question, and I think even if I did, I probably couldn't tell you.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, I would stress to my friends from Uber and Lyft, if the law is clear that transportation is a taxable event, I don't know what there is to discuss.
I forgot what I was going to ask. Any other questions of the committee members? I'm trying to think. I had something that had a very important point, but it just fleeted right out of my mind. One last question now.
Sure.
Since you can't tell us if any one particular is being audited or any of their pertinent tax information, answer this for me. I understand that businesses sometimes make errors. Sometimes they go 2 or 3 years and they don't even think they're supposed to pay their rightful share of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I take it that it's just an error on their judgment. But I'm sure that once they understand that they're in violation, that they freely open up their books so that y'all can audit them to decide what is properly owed them, owed to the state. Is that correct?
Kind of. I mean, the state offers a program called a voluntary disclosure program. So if somebody learns at some point that they have been doing things incorrectly or they have not been paying tax for some period of time, and they come forward voluntarily before we contact them and find them, then we will limit the look-back period to a period of 3 years, and we will waive penalties. The taxpayer will pay 100% of the tax and the interest that they are due to the state, and we will waive penalties and we will limit the look-back to 3 years. And that is if they come forward voluntarily. If we send you an audit notice first or we find you,
meaning
then
that
that
they
program is
actually
off
called
the-
y'all instead of y'all calling them.
Yes, and that program is actually very robust, and we collect millions of dollars a year. I don't know the exact number, but millions, if not tens of millions of dollars every year through voluntary disclosure.
Very good. If there's no other questions, Amy, we really do thank you.
You bet. Thanks.
Now, this is a time that everybody's been waiting for. This is the end of this hearing. And nobody's happier to hear this than Joe back there. I could see the stress level in his face as Amy kept answering questions. But to the committee members, actually we've only met 3 of the 5 days allocated for this committee. You have had an opportunity to hear an awful lot of information. A lot of it you didn't want to hear, but it's just part of the legislative process. As I had stated early on, this thing started out as an issue about a matter of public safety, about being sure that those people who are offering themselves as for-hire drivers are being properly scrutinized. We have a unique situation in Georgia that is typical of all laws and the system that works, that we've got a system where you have the chauffeurs, you have taxi operators, and now, thanks to modern technology and apps, you got another mousetrap that's been invented. And the question to me is, it arises, is how do we deal with this? This isn't a matter about protecting or to benefiting one over the other. This should be about fairness and parity in government, that the laws that affect one should affect all of them, whether it be sales taxes or whether it be the insurance liability issues, or it should be the vetting and verifying for public safety matters. Now, I tend to disagree with there was only one comment from law enforcement that maybe the possibility that you should hit it with a fly swatter when it comes to this. I sit as the chairman of Public Safety, Homeland Security. I sit in meetings about Homeland Security. And I don't downplay the importance of this issue. We live in a different society today than we ever have. One of the reasons that we've always vetted those people who are out there picking up the men and the women and the children in this country is you don't know who these folks are that are picking you up. But we live in an even more dangerous society than we have in the past. If you sit in these Homeland Security meetings and you talk about the information that comes out of the fusion centers, there's reasons that we do public safety and Homeland Security. It's to protect the public. Even the fickle public who likes the new day of social networking and using app-based technology, that drivers of public transportation could very well be a hazard to our security. We have in government agencies, as they do security, the fusion centers, there's a reason that there's levels of background that law enforcement is always checking on motorcycle gangs, drug operations, all the subsects of all different crimes to see what interconnects. The reason that we need to be especially cognizant of the security of these folks is that who knows what real threat could be out there that could be put forth by some, quote, lone wolf or a terrorist under the guise of being a driver of public conveyance. To me, quite frankly, it's about the bigger picture of public safety. It started out, my goal of this started out simply as a public safety issue, but as we kept delving into it last session, we saw that there was a problem about liability insurance, where everybody's expected, if you're on the roadways of this Georgia, that you have proper liability insurance for the protection and the safety of the motoring public, even more so when you're a commercial driver. Now, whether it is or is not fact what we heard in the last 2 days about this new way of insurance is app-based, that the insurance companies are going to cover us if we turn that app on until the time we turn it off. Well, you know, folks, I've been around long enough to know insurance companies and banks are about the only folks I know is making money. Insurance companies are not going to lose money. They're going to charge according to the fee structure of their loss ratio and then add the profitability onto it. But that's neither here nor there. I don't really care what company, what insurance, as long as the proper liability exists for the consuming public and the motorist out there. We talked about the revenue. It's good that we heard about revenue, but quite frankly, that's nothing that we need to deal with legislatively, because the laws are on the books that if you are providing a transportation service, you're supposed to be paying your taxes, which bears me to wonder when I hear folks say, well, you need to take my word as I'm a company owner, you need to take my word because we do such a good job in vetting drivers. But this is coming from the same folks that I wonder whether they're actually how good a corporate citizen they are when it comes to paying their rightful due. It's all right for the citizen and the working man to have to pay theirs, but others don't. These are just a few of the questions. But my charge of this committee, and we're going to have to decide if we're going to meet again or if we want to do this by teleconferencing. Your thoughts? A few of my thoughts to the committee. The idea of the background checks. What do you really think? What's your thoughts to it? Can we work out a system with DDS, as you've heard today? Background checks is still number one because that's a public safety issue. Insurance. We know for a certainty that this insurance dilemma is going to be it's going to be brought to the table. It's going to be brought to the table probably by one, if not two committees. Certainly by the insurance committee with Chairman Smith and Representative Carson, who's on that committee. Secondly, it may be included in a public safety bill. 3, the tax liability. Is there any changes you want to make? The changes that I'd recommend to y'all to look at is, do we leave the code the way it is, or do we consider a system of master license or decals or such like that to simplify the tax system? I would say at this point that might be the best idea of going, because obviously we would live in a society that's easy to cheat the government anyway by simply not filing. But at least there's a second way of doing it with the decal system. If every vehicle of public conveyance has a decal on it, it can be identified by law enforcement as well as for the taxes. Vehicle inspections. Currently, if you're a limousine, the Department of Public Safety, MCC division, they inspect your limousine. I will tell you that something is not right, but it's the antiquation of government. If you're a limousine company, you pay a certain fee to be registered with them, but they then perpetually do your inspections at no charge. Doesn't seem quite right. That's almost like going to Caesar's Palace one time and paying for the buffet, for the grand buffet, and then I keep going back every year for the next 40 years and I'm still eating at the same buffet. Not quite right. On the side of the taxis, these municipalities require inspections of taxis. Twice a year, I think we heard the city of Atlanta say it. Who knows about the others? How do we implement a system of this, or is this one of those that we should remand back to the individual taxi, limo, and, quote, rideshare folks. You basically regulate your own inspection process. If you want to go to, if you have your own shops, if you want to go to an independent garage, if you want to do whatever, but basically state point blank, which is already, I believe, law, that you cannot have a vehicle on the roadways of this state that is not in good vehicle repair. At that point, we basically leave it at the law as it is and let law enforcement in general regulate, and then the burden be on the individual companies, which is quite frankly the way it probably ought to be, because it would certainly level that playing field. We heard from about the meter as opposed to the New Day that defines the difference in a limo and a taxi. You got limos, you got taxis, and then it's still undefined what are these transportation referral companies or the drivers or that type of thing. They don't have meters in them, so they're not a taxi. But I would submit to the members of this committee that in fact a DPS coordinating device that is used is in fact a metering device. I will tell you that it's just not in the law, and it's just something new. So if that's defined as such, then these other folks who use these GPS devices would in fact could possibly be defined as a taxi. I don't know if that's the will of what this committee wants to do, but that's something I do think you need to think about. Level the playing field. I don't care if you like limos or taxis or the Uber. That's your choice. It should be your choice as a citizen. I like new technology because these are the things that make this country what it is. But there also needs to be a level playing field. You cannot have the new boys on the block that are basically putting somebody else out of business. That's not fair, and that's not the American way, nor is it the way that we do business in Georgia. Fairness and parity in operations and regulations has always been the way we operated in Georgia, and it should be. Last but not least is there was some discussion about the disclaimer rights. I had met with some of these folks the other day, and I'm not an attorney, and maybe it just went right over my head, but I still have a concern about you being able to sign your rights away. I have a problem with that, no matter who it is that you deal with. And that's something I think y'all need, and if y'all think that's an issue, I'd like to see it. What I'd like for the committee members to do at this point, because I'm becoming as long-winded as some of the folks here today, I'd like for y'all to, the next day or two, while this is fresh in your minds, I would like for y'all to make some bullet points as to what y'all think this committee needs to recommend. This is all we are, a study committee, and all this does is we make recommendations. We already know probably pretty well, or at least as a senior legislator who started this process, I pretty well know what I want to do. I'm not sure what the answers are, because it's been a movable feast in here every time somebody else testified. But I know that we have a problem, and it needs to be dealt with. And I appreciate your service on this committee. If y'all will make those notations and make some points of interest, and if you will let me know by the 1st of next week, or Abby or Misty, send your comments to them if possible, email them to them, and make a decision whether you would like to have one more meeting, a fourth meeting, for us to sit down and us to discuss and to draft language of proposals in this committee as a committee report. That way we can forward it on so that we can start dealing with the issue. Are there any other comments? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I for one, I want to thank you for leading this meeting. I want to thank everyone for attending, for all interested parties on both sides of this issue, and revenue and the public safety and so forth. I don't know what the will of the committee study members are. I would be inclined to have the rest of the week. Today's Wednesday. I'd be inclined to have the rest of the week to spend some time thinking about these key points, but knowing that the holidays are coming up and we have Christmas and New Year's, and technically our report was due the 1st of December. I think the speaker has given us an extension to the end of this month. I would be inclined to meet Monday or Tuesday of next week. I know that's Christmas Eve, but I would prefer to get our to meet privately among the study committee rather than I think these there's too many. And Lynn, I'd like to hear what you think, and the other members. There's too many technical issues here to be that I would not feel comfortable discussing this over a conference call, quite honestly. Particularly in regard to recommendations, and I know we're going to have assistants drafting our findings and our recommendations. I don't think a conference call would do. If that's the will of the committee, then that's fine. I prefer to have our bullet points and our recommendations to Abby. If we can send them to Abby or Misty by the end of the week, to your suggestion, I think that would be good. And if we could meet Monday or Tuesday, so we don't have to revisit this after Christmas, and then maybe we have something that we have in front of us as a written document, as a draft that we could edit the following week. How does that sound to everybody on the committee?
I have Monday open as Monday.
Monday. Lynn, yeah, exactly. Does anybody else have any?
I echo what you said.
Okay.
All right, then I think what the recommendations are, and I appreciate this from Representative Carson, take the next couple of days, jot some thoughts down, put them in email form, send them to Abby, Misty, and let's do that, and then let's meet Monday.
I think we by the end of the day we get some times to Abby and Misty as to what would be good. I would think.
Possibly give you time if you want to try to meet first next week before Christmas to sit down to draft the final thoughts together, or if it becomes incumbent you want to wait until the Monday after Christmas before New Year's, we can do whatever y'all want. Whatever y'all. This chairman is at your pleasure, because y'all have had to bear through this most miserable process.
I would agree. I haven't started Christmas shopping, but at the same time, this Monday would still be better for me myself.
Then send in the recommendation, whatever the will of the committee is.
10 o'clock?
Lynn said she can be with us via phone.
10 o'clock.
Bottom line, let's make these recommendations. Think through it, make some recommendations, hit on the main points, and then you can have your secondary points to also do so.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank each and every one of y'all for your diligence, and I want to give a very special parting thank you to Representative Lynn Riley. She's been a colleague and one of the most highest order, a very good thinker, as is evidenced by Governor Deal's decision to name her the Revenue Commissioner. And I have no doubt in my mind what a great job she's going to do. The positive side that goes to the Department of Revenue will be the loss to the House of Representatives in the legislative process. Lynn, thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.